It was hard to understand how it was that people were able to defeat him, the only red dragon in the world. They tried to hit vital organs, and there were witches in their squads, and very powerful ones at that. For thousands of years they have been attacking the dragon, giving their lives for it, even though he never set foot on their lands. Eventually people found his lair and then killed him. Perhaps he was already too old to fight them. He didn't remember the details of what happened before his death, but he knew one thing: whenever he found a place and called it home, people would come there. They appeared out of nowhere, chasing him and his kind and attacking them. They killed his friends, his family. He had no one left, he had nothing to lose, and in the end, they killed him too. He hoped that he could leave in peace after so many years, because it was all over. But he heard a strange sound. Before his eyes, there was some little man who was holding him in his arms and saying something. The baby screamed and cried a lot in the man's arms while his mother looked on. The dragon did not understand whether he had really become a man. The man thought that the baby liked him. How wrong he was. Of course, he wanted to unleash all the magic of the great red dragon on them. But he couldn't. Then he fell into the arms of some bloodthirsty woman, as it seemed to him. But she turned out to be quite nice. Locked inside the baby's body was a red dragon that was thirsty for revenge. He sincerely wanted to take revenge on them. But his body was now extremely weak. He spent all his energy on controlling his speech. Quite a lot of time has passed since the dragon became a human, and much has changed in him. He began to look at people differently, learned the names of his parents. They seemed nicer to him than the others. Ray's parents were often visited by different people. The man's name was Jack, by the way, and the woman's was Scarlet. They were very honest and decent. But as soon as they saw Ray himself, all the people hurried to leave their house. And all because the baby's hair began to turn red. Someone thought that the Tarun family was cursed. And yet the smart Ray was still loved by his parents, even though he was naughty. He could often make a mess, not listen to his parents, but they still did not get angry with him. No matter how he tested their patience and endurance, they never got angry. He received only a smile and love in response, and sometimes he even seemed to feel ashamed of all his pranks. If hell could exist, it clearly wasn't this one, because they loved it here. In the human world, talented people were a great rarity, and his mother, being an outstanding magician, was worth her weight in gold. He understood that if he could have his mother's abilities, he could easily take revenge on people. He understood that if this were so, then taking revenge on people would be much easier than he expected. The boy knew that when he reached 2 years of age, he could take a test to see if he had magical abilities. Today was the day when he and his mother left for the city. He was definitely supposed to show a good result. He was 100% sure that he would pass this test. After all, he was the greatest red dragon. Even though it was a baby, inside it was the most powerful being. He understood that if he regained his strength, then no one and nothing would stop him from returning to the top. The path to the castle went through the city market. Alas, people could treat even their own with contempt. It was difficult to understand their nature, because dragons tried, on the contrary, to protect the weak and help each other. At this time, the test was already underway at Roland College, and people were standing in a long queue. They warned that they would call everyone on the list. There were a lot of people. Not everyone passed it. A girl ran out of the room in tears, her mother running after her. Next up was Ray Tarun and his mother, the boy looking at all this with extreme skepticism. The room was not very well lit. In the center sat an old man with a robe. His face was not visible. Only a long beard stuck out from under the hood. He invited the girl to sit down and said that her son should touch the ball. The point was that, having discovered some magic, the ball should light up, which means there is talent. The glow was not just random. A certain color indicated what ability the child was predisposed to. But Ray's ball didn't glow. He looked at his crying mother, hoping that she was crying from happiness. He was not as good at anything as he was at magic, but the magician's verdict was not comforting. There was no magic. The girl did not understand. She herself was a magician, however. While she was thinking, her son showed his bewilderment. They thought that the ball was broken, but in reality, everything was different. The magic simply did not obey the baby. Although the little one could not speak, although he wanted to say a lot, his hands were quite capable. Scarlet had a hard time peeling her child away from the old man before the security arrived. They were returning home in the evening. Ray thought that he was sent here for a reason. Maybe God was testing him. He had to find a way to take revenge. And it seems he found it the next day at lunch, when the whole family was eating the prepared roast together. Ray asked his dad to teach him how to fight. Talking wasn't that easy yet. Oh, that human body. The father was beside himself with happiness. His son asked him to teach him how to fight. He wanted to become a knight. However, the path to becoming a knight turned out to be much more difficult than he thought, including because of his weak body. The father told the boy to attack, so he gripped the wooden sword tighter in his hands, preparing to attack. There was no need to hurry, that he shouldn't hurry. The main thing was to wait for the right moment. Today he had to defeat his father. He had prepared, studied, and accepted defeat for too long. But in the end, his clumsy body simply couldn't keep up with his flight of thought, and his hands only slowed him down. Ray woke up to the gentle caresses of his mother's hands and the muttering of his father, who insisted that everything would be fine. The father claimed that there was only a year left until the night's exam. They should prepare hard. He felt that his son had talent. Of course, Scarlet believed that her son did not necessarily have to follow in their footsteps. But her father stood his ground. The guy listened attentively about the academy. The exams were in a year, which meant he still had time to spare. He called his parents, distracting them from their argument, and said that he would definitely cope with everything. The boy understood that being the reincarnation of a red dragon, he could not be as weak as the others, and not only physically. His main task now was to control his own body, which did not obey him. However, his dad distracted him from training by unexpectedly appearing in the backyard and calling him over. Ray decided to take a break and ran to his dad, who looked at him with great love and warmth. He handed his son a sword and said that he was already strong enough, which meant he could train with his own real sword. And then he whispered that a surprise was waiting for him in the barn, and there was already a wooden doll there, which was introduced to him as a puppet for training nights. Jack explained that it had different levels of difficulty, but the kid had a hard time believing it. After all, it looked normal, and his father only advised him to try it out, to which Ray promised to be lenient. The first level was activated. The puppet rushed into battle, attacking and defending. The boy was clearly not ready for such power. It seems that even his father didn't train with him as much as this doll did. And in the end, the weapon was knocked out of the baby's hands. The baby looked closely at the doll. The child's body was not ready, and he could not teach it to do everything right. Father said that if he defeats the first-level puppet, he will definitely pass the exam to enter the academy. The red-haired man's eyes lit up. He felt that he would soon defeat the puppet. But while everything was going on as usual, people were working somewhere in the village. Ray was sitting in the forest. To be more precise, he wasn't just sitting, but resting after a long workout. He was truly exhausted. He was still trying to deal with the clumsy human body that was not trying to obey him. The guy was about to get up when he heard an unfamiliar voice, immediately standing up. The girl, who appeared before him as a cute little girl with blue eyes and golden hair, asked what he was talking about. She caught him by surprise, the guy confessed. But she replied that she didn't want to scare him. She looked quite friendly. The girl introduced herself and said that she lived in a village, and she knew the guy's name because he was very popular in the village. She said that he shouldn't sit in the forest so late, because no one would touch him during the day. But in the evening, monsters would appear. The guy thought about her words. He was famous because of his red hair. Red symbolized power and evil. And here parents often scared their children with the red dragon. People made themselves heroes in their own history. But they were not liberators, but attacked them themselves, perceiving the act of self-defense as dragon hostility. The boys set off home from the forest together, but on the way they met a blonde guy who turned out to be Amy's brother. He told his sister to stay away from the red-haired brat because everyone knew he was cursed. The girl began to defend him, which was surprising. It seemed she did not consider him a freak. Only insults directed at him did not touch him, but he could not allow anyone to speak out against his parents. The guy couldn't listen to such statements in silence. He had to shut them up. He called them and attacked two thugs who were standing next to Gary, Amy's brother. But he got in his way and had to be pushed away. He didn't need him. He needed the two who had touched his family, so he told the blonde to stay out of the way. But Gary himself reminded him that his parents were mercenaries, and his father was an outstanding swordsman. Therefore, since the guy is ready, he will gladly accept his challenge and fight him, but without weapons. Saying that he was afraid to kill him, the blonde threw away his weapon. Ray followed his example, throwing his aside. Although Amy protested, the fight began. The guys fought like children due to their age. But Ray, although he expected to win, was on the losing side. He was physically stronger, but his body did not obey him. Gary held in his hands a bag of coins belonging to the guy, mocking. At home, his sister scolded him, saying that he had gone too far, but he seemed not to hear her, and only told her not to be friends with that guy. He reminded her that the whole village was afraid of his red hair. She should have remembered that her family were ordinary people, but she only ran into the room in tears. It was dark outside. It seemed like night would soon fall. Ray went into the house, trying not to meet his mother. But alas, there, I immediately went to him to find out if he would have dinner, and saw bruises on the guy's face. The girl was shocked that she was going to fight, but he started to deny it, saying that everything was fine and that he was just fighting. Mom said that the wounds urgently needed to be washed, and there could have been a scar left, but he said that scars adorn a man. The guy decided to practice before dinner. He activated the first level, getting into a stance. The puppet began to attack. At first, the guy fought back. He knew all the combinations of his attacks, but he was still defeated by the doll, and he couldn't defeat it again, even though he found its weak points. The next morning, the guy went into the forest again to train, but he saw someone's shadow along the way. The closer he came, the clearer the outlines became. There stood Amy, who, seeing him, began to wave her hand to him. She greeted him and said that she wanted to apologize to him for yesterday. The guy said that it was not her fault. When he started training, he said that he was just not as good as the others. She was ready to burst into tears from the feeling of shame. The guy could not stand this sentimentality, but it was also difficult to leave her like that. He took the apple from her basket and said that everything was fine, that everything had changed since that day. Amy began to come to the same place every day. Sometimes she chatted incessantly about everything under the sun. Sometimes she read silently. Gradually, they became closer. He got used to Amy's presence in his life. While Ray was walking with Amy, there were horses and knights in the yard of the Terran's house, and voices could be heard from the house. The man said that the border villages were attacked by monsters, and they found out about it after seeing the victims. Most of the victims were infected. They were delirious and could not tell anything about what happened, so they approached the Terran family to assist them in the investigation. Monsters usually avoided crowded places, so the situation was extremely strange. At this time, Ray looked at Amy, breaking something. He was still having difficulty coordinating his movements. He caught himself looking at the girl, so he immediately told himself to get ready. He told Amy that it was time for them to go home. As they walked, the guy asked her if she was bullied for being friends with him, but she replied that he was special, and she didn't care about others. She told him to be himself. Gary's words came to mind. He grabbed her shoulders, thanking her. They said goodbye right in front of Ray's house, and without going inside, he immediately ran to the barn to test his theory. The guy walked into the barn, activating the first level, and then stood further away, taking the handle in his teeth. He got down on all fours. Amy's words were spinning in his head, and then Gary's words about how he should be himself. He attacked the puppet from all sides, attacking and fighting off the doll's attacks. His knowledge of the puppet's attacks also helped him. The body became more flexible. Now the moment had come when he could understand how to move forward. The final attack, the puppet froze. Ray caught his breath and began to turn slowly. The puppet's eyes lit up green. A voice announced that the level had been completed. Ray was happy. The guy sat happily, thinking about how many levels he could pass. He remembered that if he passed the first level, he would definitely get into the academy. The next day he woke up in the morning from some noise downstairs. His father was getting ready there. It was very early. The father said that he would make it in time for his son's exams, and that he should continue training. Ray remembered his father's words about believing in him. So today, as always, he went to training thinking about his dad's departure. He understood that even though he would take revenge on people, he loved his parents very much, them and Amy. The guy was happy. He thought about Amy and his family, realizing that he was attached to them and that he loved them. But as soon as he arrived at the place, he saw that Amy was not there. But he immediately pulled himself together, deciding to continue training. After training, he lay down to get his breathing back to normal, and then ran home so that his mother wouldn't worry. But on the way home, he heard people talking about something with concern. One mother screamed and asked for her sons to be returned. The man said that the children came to him. The man said that those children wanted to go into the forest at night to hunt monsters. Ray, passing by, heard that they were gone. Freezing. It seems that is why Amy did not come today. It seemed like he had a choice now, and he chose Amy, immediately rushing back into the forest after the boys. While he was running, he remembered the blue-eyed girl, hoping that he would have time to come to her, since he hadn't thanked her yet. At this time, a frightened Amy was sitting in the forest behind Gary, who was protecting her. Bob and Kyle were lying unconscious somewhere in the bushes. The monster was advancing. The guy, without looking back, ran back into the forest, hoping to make it to Amy. The night was clear. The moon lit up the sky. The guy smelled blood. It seemed he was on the right track. He should go further. He was worried that Amy was in danger, but seeing the dead wolf demon cub gave him a sigh of relief. There were traces of human weapons on the animal's body. The carcass was warm. They were close. The tracks were confused. The guy didn't immediately understand where to go, but then he heard screams. It seemed they were there. The screams, judging by the voice, belonged to Amy's scream. Gary protected his sister as best he could, but the monster was stronger. Gary passed out, falling next to his sister, who cried harder, trying to bring her brother to his senses. The monster growled louder, becoming even more inflamed by the girl's tears, and began to run towards the source of the noise. She closed her eyes, whispering something under her breath, but Ray managed to do so, pointing his weapon at the monster. The girl was shouting something at him. He asked how she was. She seemed okay, so he continued to fight back. Of course, it affected him too. It would have been easier if Gary was fighting with him against the wolf now, but he had to work with what he had. However, Ray assured a worried Amy that he himself hoped that he would not die that night. It was worth taking the wolf away from Amy so that he wouldn't hurt her. The guy tried to fight even with a sword in his teeth. It seemed that the new technology helped a lot, but the human body was still too weak. It couldn't handle the load. Its speed was insignificant compared to the demon wolf. When he was a red dragon, this demon was insignificant to him. Now he himself was insignificant to the demon. He began to growl at the monster, saying that these people belonged to him, and then began to wait for him to start attacking. The demon began to approach. He understood that if this attack did not work, then they would all be finished. He needed to find his weak spot. While cutting off the wolf's leg, the boy remembered how in the old days he could put its brains on his claw. The carcass fell to the floor with a thud, causing Amy and Gary's bodies to stagger, and he fell to the ground, catching his breath. Fiery circles began to appear before my eyes, and then some kind of fiery creature that made some sounds. He lay there and didn't understand what it was. The creature made sounds for a couple of seconds, and then a board unfolded in front of him. He didn't pay attention to this thing. The main thing was to get the guys out of the forest. He needed to get up. He threw Gary on his back and picked up Amy in his arms. He couldn't carry Bob and Kyle. He didn't have enough strength. He did everything in his power, leaving the survival of the other two to fate. At this time, people were standing in the forest, deciding who would go into the forest. Had they really still not decided? He carried the boys out of the forest to the whispers of their elders, wondering if they were really behaving like this again out of fear. He didn't even think about hoping for their help. He simply collapsed next to the light coming from the torches. People tried to check on the children and help them as their parents walked, but Bob and Kyle's mother would not calm down. They tried to hold her back, but she still ran into the forest after her sons, although she immediately returned, frightened. But as soon as she returned, she immediately attacked Ray, accusing him of the disappearance of her children. Following the screams came a slap in the face and then accusations of what happened, and even hair was dragged into it. He did help them, but instead of gratitude, they blamed him for what happened, although he also suffered. People turned against him, and the baby's head was spinning. It was difficult to understand anything. The guy just looked at the people walking towards him, wondering why they forgot that he was also a child. They called him a monster, but he was only 5 and didn't understand if it was his red hair that was to blame. The woman began to approach him with a torch, trying to set him on fire, but Gary stood up for him. Memories flashed through his head until he suddenly opened his eyes, waking up. It seemed like it was a dream. The boy began to focus his vision, but realized that one eye was under a bandage, and his mother was lying next to him. Scarlett just lay on the bed, dropping tears on the bed and waiting for her son to wake up. The boy looked at his mother, not understanding how people could be so wonderful and so cruel at the same time. He stroked his mother's head, showing signs of life, and she immediately raised her head, looking at her son. She hugged him tightly, saying that she was worried about the baby's condition and thought that he would not wake up. Although he squealed that it hurt, she said that now the guy would no longer be so reckless. She said that it was worth telling her father that he had woken up. But when asked about the boys, she replied that 2 of them had never been found. Scarlett ran to her son while Gary was protecting him. She made it in time. No matter how the adults accused him, she didn't believe them. She hugged her son close, not believing that her husband was protecting these people personally. How could they treat him like that? She took her child, listening to insults directed at her child, and yet these people smiled at them when they met. But before leaving, Mom said that Gary had told her everything and went off to cook dinner, while the child himself began to deal with the fire cat. This thing scared him a little, but then he pressed something and his eye turned black. It was the ability from his past life. He looked through the wall. His mother was tired. She needed rest. He wished his father would come back soon. When he was still a red dragon, he had a huge amount of magic, and now it was starting to return. The guy, thinking about his own things, smelled something burning. People on the street were shouting that the house was on fire, but no one was helping. Ray's mother ran into the room, saying that the house was on fire and they needed to get out of there right now. Scarlett began using magic to put out the fire while Ray used his ability to try to find who did it. The people who looked at the burning house thought that the red-haired guy was to blame for everything. At this time, Mrs. Tarun was using spells to try to stop this mess. The fire went out in an instant. Scarlett took her son by the hand, leading him home. He smiled at her, but in his soul he was puzzled. The next day, after his mother's instructions, Ray went into the forest again, but instead of training, he went with a bucket to the place where he found Gary and Amy. The red-haired man activated his dragon's gaze, scanning the area. There were many small monsters nearby. They were not dangerous, but they could provide crystals that could pump up his level in the system. Sometime after the destruction of the animals, he finally found the necessary crystal. The system showed that he had found what he needed. The guy looked at the scoreboard, realizing that he was lucky, because he was able to get 2 crystals from 20 carcasses. However, he did not kill everyone. A small wolf demon ran up to the killed demon. It seems it was a wolf cub, which he called to him. The system showed that he could tame the cub, which he did, although afterward the wolf cub was absorbed into him. At first he was scared, but decided that he could deal with this later. But for now, it was worth getting down to business. He activated the Dragon Eye mode again and began to survey the area for the people he needed. He saw 2 corpses in the mountain, which belonged to Bob and Kyle. He was on the right track. The guy didn't climb the mountain for long, but there was a slight pain in his legs. The cave greeted him with a pile of bones and corpses. The guy approached the corpses and began to take things off them. He needed to take them and the blood and entrails. The boy took everything he needed as he left the cave. A long day and a long night lay ahead of him. The boy was lying on his bed in the evening, waiting to be put to bed. After all, he was 15, and his mother was scolding him for training too much. Mom told him that Dad would be arriving soon, and the boy began jumping on the bed, happy. True. After that, the brunette started to swear, demanding that he finally lie down under the blanket. Late at night, the boy woke up, realizing that it was time, and went to the barn for buckets so that he could then go about his business. There was a knock at Bob and Kyle's mother's house, and a woman came down and shouted for them to wait. As she walked out the door, she thought it might be Bob and Kyle coming out of the woods. She opened the door but didn't see anyone. Kyle's t-shirt was lying near the house. She ran to it. Was it a sign? She took the torch and ran into the forest, where she saw Bob's t-shirt on a branch. The guy saw her, heard her steps. He waited, and when she approached the right place, he let go of the rope. The bucket overturned, pouring blood on the woman. She screamed. The guy jumped out of the tree. The woman began to accuse him of the death of her children, and a second later, the monsters gathered at the smell of blood. The next day, rumors of the woman's death spread throughout the village, and many people whispered behind her back. But the guy heard everything. He was used to it. They avoided him and were afraid of him. He liked it. As he approached the house, he heard the neighing of horses. There were people in uniform standing in the yard. The boy realized that his dad had arrived, and he joyfully ran into the house, shouting to his father that he had arrived. But instead of his father, he saw a group of knights, his mother kneeling in front of the bed, and his father lying on the sofa. He froze, not understanding anything. From the conversation he heard that his father had a shadow plague, but he remembered someone like that. Mom cried. The knights apologized. He didn't know about the shadow plague. When he was a dragon, there was no such thing. The guy hoped that he could find an answer in the system. He turned on the Dragon Eye mode, but nothing helped. No new information. The system didn't give any clues either, but he decided that if he became stronger, he would be able to do something. After the knights left, the boy approached his mother, asking if he would become stronger if he entered the Knight Academy. The girl replied that he was right, that he would definitely get in and could do everything, smiling warmly at her son. The baby said that then he would become strong and help his dad recover from his illness, and his mother hugged her son. At this time, the ball in the room showed that the prophecy that had been so long awaited had come true. The elders looked at the ball. A red-haired child appeared. Now it remained to be seen whether he would bring happiness to the world of people or bring destruction. The next day was marked by the arrival of the knights, and so a year passed. The father returned for the exam, though not as he had promised. The carts drove through the square to the delighted cries of the people who were greeting them for another year. The 3 leading knights sat in the saddles, walking in front, and the people greeted them again and again every year. The girls looked at the first knights of the state with loving eyes. Each one was delighted with them. They got off their horses and started climbing the stairs to make the announcement the competition could begin. In the center stood Knight Winford from Avrian Academy. Next to him stood Knight Delbert and Knight Bernardo. Everyone listened attentively, preparing for the tests. The red-haired one, hiding his hair under a hood, looked at the arena. Today, these 3 were supposed to evaluate the children. Knight Winford pointed to the puppet with the sword. Ray's dad was right. You had to defeat the puppet to pass. The first boy who was called failed the test after a second. The parents who were rooting for him immediately froze and fell silent. It was a fiasco, but he was not the only one. Knight Bernardo declared defeat. Ray watched the puppet's actions closely, trying to figure out how to defeat it. The first-level puppet couldn't move, but it defended itself well and counterattacked quickly, just like an adult. Knight Delbert looked at Winford, not understanding why they were there. He thought that they had nothing to look for among the villagers. However, Gary, who came out during their conversation, was able to defeat the puppet. and Bernardo reported that the first winner had appeared. Knight Delbert and Knight Winford paused in their conversation and looked at the arena to see the winner. Over time, the boy's senses became heightened due to the appearance and increase in the number of crystals, so he could hear their conversation. Ray was next, so Delbert, seeing the red-haired man, immediately approached the puppet, increasing the difficulty level to 3. Gary, seeing Ray from the arena, gave the guy a thumbs up as a sign of support as he walked into the arena. The magic puppet activated the 3rd level, attacking the guy. Everyone watching froze, watching what would happen. Knight Winford drew his sword to save the child and shouted at him to run away from the arena. However, Sir Winford did not have time to run to the guy, as he knocked the puppet's head off its wooden body with one blow. The whole stadium froze. The red-haired boy was able to win. He went out to his mother, who came to support him. Ray Taroon was accepted into the Avrian Knights Academy. The boy stood in front of the bed where his father lay. He told his father that he had been accepted, and in his heart, he hoped that he could find a way to cure his father there. Before leaving the house, he said goodbye to his mother, who put the pendant in his hands. She said that it was their family heirloom, and that it would bring the boy good luck in the future. The boy said that it was time for him to go and wished his mother luck, and she told him to take care of himself. He said that everything would be fine with him, because he was a man, and everything would be fine. But his mother still said that she would always help him. The boy left with a backpack and a sword given to him by his father, heading towards the meeting place where the knights were waiting for him. He was met by the Knight Winford, who said that he had been long awaited, and entering the carriage, he saw Gary Brubard. Gary and Ray were riding in the carriage together. It was awkward. At this time, the carriage with the escort was moving towards the academy. The guys were silent for a long time from the very beginning of the trip, and Gary was the first to try to start a conversation. He asked the guy for forgiveness. The red-haired one at first thought he had misheard, turning to face the blonde. Gary asked for forgiveness for what had happened between them in the past, bowing, but he said that everything was fine. He said he was just a kid, but Gary didn't understand because he was 5 too. But he quickly changed the subject, asking how Amy was doing, since for some reason she hadn't come to see her brother off. Gary told the guy while they were driving that Amy had entered Roland's academy, so she was not in the village now. Their dialogue was interrupted by a shout from outside about the carriage stopping. They climbed out to see what had happened. There was a thick fog all around. The knights did not dare to attack right away. First, the Knight Winford introduced himself and asked those hiding to name themselves. A girl came out to them, asking for help. She introduced herself by name, saying that she was a mercenary of the guild. She said that they were attacked by shadow monsters. No one could understand how these creatures could get here. The guys also listened attentively to the entire dialogue. Ray, when he heard the words about shadow monsters, thought about his father. They heard that they were not going to the Knight Academy itself, but to the town of Rennes. But Sir Delbert explained that they could not be sent there due to their age. The academy was located right on the border, so the children could not be sent there. The boys had to begin their education in the town of Rennes. Knight Winford joined the conversation, telling about the location of the academy, but the conversation was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of a shadow monster. There was a thick purple fog all around. The animals, subordinate to the shadow, stood grinning, blood flowing from their mouths. In front of them stood the king of the zombie bears. Next to him were the shadow monsters, and the knights hoped that they could fight back and protect the children. The zombie bear king growled and the knights tensed, getting into a fighting stance. The shadow beasts began to make their way between the knights, attacking them, and the people could not catch them. Knight Bernardo turned away, watching the monster as it crept up behind him. But he noticed it too late, realizing that he would not have time to fight back. However, the red-haired man came to the rescue and repelled the blow in time. Bernardo praised Ray and told the boys to try to protect themselves. The knights fought back, looking at the zombie bear king. He didn't move. It seemed like he was just controlling the shadow monsters. The knights managed to talk to each other, trying to understand the reason for the shadow monster's behavior. The monster Gary was fighting managed to hit him while he was defending himself. But Ray arrived in time and was able to hit the monster. Gary warned Ray that the zombie bears were much stronger than the demon wolves. At some point, a roar was heard, the force of which almost blew the guys away from their place. The monster's strength was enormous. The zombie bear king pointed his finger towards the people. His eyes glowed red, and he began to speak. Everyone froze, not understanding why the bear did not attack, but he began to say that they would never be able to defeat the shadow. The shadow would have covered these lands sooner or later. Everyone was doomed. After his words, the demon disappeared. Ray had the feeling that these words were spoken specifically to him, and that the creature was threatening him with them. Everyone was glad that they weren't attacked by a zombie bear, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten out alive. Ray saw a notification from the system at that moment. He received the monster crystals, but something still bothered him. Mr. Winford praised the boys, saying they had done well, and Ray asked how often they had encountered such creatures. Winford didn't understand why Ray was so calm. He was so little. In the morning they arrived in Ren. The night was finally over, fortunately without any losses. 10 years had passed since the day they arrived in Ren. They were teenagers, and in the classroom, a teacher was interviewing children. After Gary answered the question, the teacher asked where Ray was. Gary froze, not understanding where he had gone again. He immediately tried to cover for his friend, saying that he had gone to the toilet, and she sighed again, resigned. At this time, Noah, once Ray's pet who had grown into a large demonic wolf, was competing with a wild boar. Ray gave the order to the beast, which attacked the large animal, disarming it. The system reported that he received the monster's small crystals. He let the beast out, finished training for today. He decided to come later, otherwise someone could lose their temper. On the way, he accidentally ran into Winford, who, on his way to the academy, saw him. Winford said that the boy was really no slouch, since he was able to escape the notice of their valiant guards. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years, and the knight noticed that the boy had really grown up and had become much taller. They walked together, talking. Ray noted that he still didn't know how old the man was, and he responded by saying that his mentor had complained about him because he often hunted animals instead of teaching. Knight Winford noted that if the boy had gone any further, he would have been grabbed by the guards, and also said that he had gone to his family's home. For 10 years, the boy tried to become stronger and gain more abilities to help his father, but he never found any cure. Winford put his arm around the boy's shoulder, breaking him out of his own thoughts, and invited him to return to the city together. Winford couldn't wait to meet the other kids, but he missed him and Gary so much. At this time, Aaron was scolding another security guard for losing sight of the boy, allowing him to run away from class again. But as soon as Winford appeared with the guy in the man's field of vision, he began to shout at the guy, asking where he had disappeared to again. While Winford was trying to separate the two, students were already gathering in the town square of Ren. Ray saw Gary in the square. He noticed that the boy returned early and immediately realized that he had been caught. At this time, Squire Lancey was telling the students about how they would be moving to the academy. He was supposed to accompany them. The journey was supposed to last about 7 days. Someone asked Winford which way the children would go this time. Knight Winford said that they would ride through the swamp. The knight suggested that it would be quite difficult for the children, but he said that since they were knights, they should be able to pass the tests. This time, the test was a test not only for them. The next morning, the future knights were already approaching the city gates, leaving Ren. At this time, Ray, who had not gotten enough sleep, was sitting in the carriage, snoring, and it seemed that he was not even worried about what would happen next. One of the guys asked why they didn't use the teleporter to move to the academy. The boys were arguing among themselves, but their argument was interrupted by Scavia, who said that the academy was on the border. When she was captured, the enemies could gain access to travel to any point in the state. The guys listened to her carefully. In fact, Scavia was quite smart. The guys listened to her while Ray was sleeping. It was decided to make a stop not far from the ruined fortress city. The guys were given the task of setting up camp, and then they could rest. Ray and Gary, as always, were busy putting up tents together, while Gary teased the other guy about how Scavia had clearly taken a liking to him. At this time, Monk and Dan, who had left the camp at Dan's behest, were standing behind the abandoned castle. Behind the castle they saw a swamp, but Lancey immediately caught them and told them that they should go back if they didn't want to get screwed. Night quickly covered the sky. Guards stood and watched the tents protecting the children. At this time, Ray, who was able to look around here during the day, calmly slipped away from the guards. However, he was caught by Scavia. She grabbed his arm, stopping him. She asked where the guy was going so late. He said he was going to hunt monsters. Early in the morning, everyone was awakened by sounds coming from outside. Gary opened his eyes with difficulty, trying to wake up. As soon as Gary saw his friend, he immediately jumped out of bed, asking what Ray had done again. But Gary didn't bother to figure it out, knowing that his friend didn't like that kind of thing. So he just stood up and started to lift his friend up so that they wouldn't get punished. At this time, Ray thought that by the time he arrived at the academy, he would be able to absorb all the crystals of the small monsters. Then he hoped to absorb all the crystals of the medium monsters. The camp was packed up. The guys were on their way to the academy again. However, at some point the carts stopped. It became quiet, and then toothy worms began to break into the carts. The boys immediately grabbed their swords to attack, and many began to climb out of the carts to start the fight. Gary told everyone to get ready for battle. One of the girls got scared, but Gary saved her in time. Gary told everyone that the sharp-toothed worms did not move alone. They would be arriving. Everyone should climb higher, and first of all, "Get out of the carriage." Everyone got out of the carriage and gathered in groups with their backs to each other in threes, trying not to leave any empty spaces. Everyone got out to fight except Ray, who looked out of the wagon and saw Winford, Delbert, and Bernardo. The guy immediately realized that they were under protection, so he refused Dan's offer to help them. The knights, who were watching the children closely, made conclusions about each of them, and someone decided that the red-haired one could only receive a red belt. At this time, one of the knights drew the attention of the others to Gary. The guy was doing great. His movements were precise and confident. He had good control over his body. Lancey noted that he could get a white belt. Besides him, they also paid attention to Scavia, who, although she rarely took the initiative, had excellent instincts. She had a good grip, and Sir Lancey also noted that she was quite smart. The girl had a head on her shoulders. The knights looked closely at the children. At some point they gathered into one big one, which was the first to attack Dan. The guys immediately started trying to break and kill him. It was difficult to somehow immobilize him, but it worked with difficulty. However, Ian intervened and was able to tear the worm apart. The guy was extremely strong, and then Kale intervened. When it was all over, the boys were put into carts to be taken further. They passed the test. Gary began to scold him for acting like a loner, but he replied that he didn't want to strain himself while the knights were around. The guys discussed what had happened. Someone was treating wounds. Dan started talking about belts. The guys who didn't know immediately became interested in this. He started talking about the belt system at the academy. The point was that the color of the belt determined the academy's attitude towards the student. Ray began to listen. Receiving a red belt left the student on his own. He had to find a way to get this belt. The Avrian Academy welcomed the new students in all its glory, flags and banners fluttering in the wind. Everyone got out of the carriages, looking around the academy, their attention drawn to the details and size of the building. Someone noticed that the academy was lit not by ordinary torches, but by magic crystals. The academy was considered a city. In this city, every inhabitant was a knight working for it. Lancey immediately told the children not to wander off and to follow him, because he would not look for those who were lost. Lancey gave them a quick tour of the main areas to explain how the academy worked. He showed them the armory, then the library. All the inhabitants and workers of Avrion were knights who studied at the academy. The next and last place of the excursion was the burial place of the knights who died in the battle for the kingdom of Arul. Ray froze, looking at the statues. While Lancey was telling something, the dragon looked at the statue, trying to understand if what he saw was really true. These people actually used the bodies of dragons to make armor and weapons. His eyes were burning with fire. He was thirsty for revenge. His family and friends were killed to make weapons with which their own relatives were killed. Lancey said that the monument belonged to the legendary Dragon Knight. But Ray's question about who it was ignored by the squire. Lancey said that they would understand who it was once they learned more about the history of the academy, and then told everyone to follow him. Everyone left. Ray remained standing in place. Gary could not help but notice the guy's strange behavior. Gary called out to the guy, but he was staring at the monument. He turned on the dragon's eye mode, scanning the place. He didn't tell anyone that there was a tomb under the cemetery where something alive was located. The guys were looking at their neighbors, or rather Gary was looking. The second one was in the clouds, and Scavia was among the neighbors. Scavia didn't understand how she could live with boys. She immediately blushed with indignation. Gary decided to make fun of her for her outrage, but then got punched in the nose by her, falling to the floor. As soon as she left to sort things out with the squire, the boys began to meet new neighbors. No one dared to enter the room. Everyone started greeting each other. Ray noticed that one of them also had red hair. At this time, Scavia returned, absolutely angry, telling no one to enter the room until she left. After the door slammed, their last neighbor, Dan, arrived and didn't understand why they were standing at the door. Gary said there was a cockroach and they were waiting for him to come and solve their problem. Then he ran into the room to figure it out. As soon as the door slammed shut, a loud scream was heard. Not a woman's, full of pain and despair. Dan was screaming. After everyone had put their things in their rooms, they went to the dining room to have a snack. Dan was outraged that Gary had set him up like that, but Gary just laughed, egging the guy on even more. True, this didn't last long, because Scavia herself came and started scolding the guys for their behavior. However, after a couple of minutes the conversation had already flowed into a calm channel. Everyone was discussing the upcoming presentation of the belts. However, the guys' conversation was interrupted by two impudent guys who allowed themselves to start insulting Ray and Gary, and then took on the modest Ian. Soon, all the guys with red hair started to be insulted. Juan held Duo back so that he wouldn't do anything wrong. Monk was the first to stand up for Ian, and then Ray joined in, throwing meat at him with all his might, and he actually hit him. The guy immediately screamed. not understanding who had managed to throw something at him, but Ray immediately slammed his face into the table, wringing his arms. At this time, Sir Lancey was talking to one of the knights. A noise arose in the dining room, and a fight began. None of his friends dared to touch Ray. They tried to calm him down with words. But the guy was adamant. The guy didn't care at all whether anyone was looking at him. He knew that he couldn't let something like this go unpunished. The guy screamed. No words reached his consciousness, clouded by rage and anger. Squire Lancey intervened, demanding that the guy stop all the outrage. But Ray had his own things to say. He addressed Ian, saying that from childhood he understood one important thing: if someone tried to hurt you and assert themselves at your expense, then they needed to be given what they deserved. Sir Lancey Ray replied that he ignored his words, just as he ignored him, then went off with Gary to continue eating. The three leading knights entered the dining room, led by Sir Winford, and it was time to present the belts. A buzz of joy rose in the room from meeting the knights, but the leader immediately made it clear with a gesture that silence should be observed. As soon as everyone fell silent, the elders who were to be introduced began to enter the room. Ray froze. The aura of these people was as strong as that of those who killed him. The guy intuitively tensed up. The dragon inside him felt alarmed, raging, his insides burning with the desire for revenge. He was confused. After the presentation, the elders brought out a table on which the belts lay. Everyone froze, starting to worry. Winford started by saying that everyone who came here was no longer an ordinary person, so there was no need to be upset. They could still make up for lost time. Ray looked at him with a pleasant smile. After all, inspirational speeches were his thing. Ray thought about the red belt that was waiting. At this time, the process was handed over to the Squire Lancey, who was to conduct the first test. The boys were gathered at the stadium to begin the tests. Lancey said that each had to pass 5 exams. Each exam was aimed at demonstrating different knightly skills, dragging the gem of power, igniting the earth, and so on. The first day was marked by 2 tests, starting with the power gem. The day was drawing to a close, the sun was setting, the future knights, and for now the students of the Avrian Academy listened attentively to the examiner. The rules of the test were extremely simple. You had to push the stone with all your might, and the test would end when it crossed the mark. 2 attempts were given to pass. If the first attempt was unsuccessful, then it was possible to use the second one using a magic glove. While Lancey explained what it was for and what it did, Gary and Ray whispered to each other, noting that the task was not difficult. However, before the test began, Lancey made one final statement, saying that he was disqualifying a student named Ray Tarun from taking the test. Ray smirked as he watched the attempt to do something bad to him. He didn't even know that he was only helping him. Lancey said that he was showing through the boy's example that all who want to become knights must obey their superiors, and not only on the battlefield. The guys looked at him, realizing that he had a grudge against him. This behavior outraged everyone except the victim. However, no one objected. It was decided to begin the test. Scavia advised the guy to talk to the management, but Ray simply wished his friends good luck and left contentedly to wait for other tests. It was his choice. He would have put Lancey as an examiner for the tests. Test number 1 was passed by everyone. Ray told his friend that the next test was related to magic. He panicked. However, his friend reassured him, saying that everything would be the same no matter what he could do when he got to the battlefield. The second test, called the Ignition of the Earth, began, and Gary, who was the first to go to the magician, started it. The guy was able to hold out for 57 seconds, which was a very good result. Following him was Scavia, who was aware of how the test was going, and therefore was able to stand for 5 minutes and resist the magic. Everyone admired her, because the girl not only held out, but also 5 times longer than the guy before her. As she was leaving for the stands, she ran into Ray and wished him luck. He didn't need it, but he thanked her anyway. The guy stood up, waiting for the start. He expected to count 20 seconds and leave. The old man began the test. The guy couldn't understand where he was. Everything inside was purple. There was a thunderstorm, but without any noise. The guy froze, hearing a strange sound, followed by a huge red dragon. It was himself. The flames engulfed everything around. The guy was thrown away from the magician, and the magician was thrown away from him. Everyone fell silent. The old man, as soon as he came to his senses, immediately shouted that the boy was cursed by the red dragon. Everyone around started whispering. It was impossible not to hear the elder's words. This was no longer entirely to the guy's advantage. Winford immediately ran to the elder to help him up and send him to the infirmary. Ray stood behind, asking how the old man was doing. The man said that everything was fine, and then told the guy to go and rest too, since he had gotten it too. The elders were informed that one of them had mana disease, caused by exhaustion, but that he would only need to rest. As soon as Winford left, one of the old men ordered something to his subordinate. The boy became alarmed. Ray went to the infirmary to rest. His friends looked at him, waiting for him to come over to talk. The guys stood after the second test, discussing what happened, namely the magician who lost his mana. Scavia explained that mana sickness occurs when a person continues to release magic even after the mana has run out. The girl continued to tell how suddenly someone's scream was heard, and then an earthquake began. The boys didn't immediately understand what had happened. It was as if the ground had disappeared from under their feet, and a jungle had grown up around them. The entire training ground was overgrown with trees. Dust began to settle everywhere. The guys started coughing, trying to see something. From somewhere, a strong male voice is heard, announcing the beginning of the third test. The boys began to look around to understand who exactly was speaking, and soon they saw the examiner of the third test. Everyone listened carefully to what the dark-haired man said. They just had to follow him. The third test was a meta-acoustic test, and as soon as it started, Monk was the first to run after it. The guy, surprisingly, reacted very quickly. The others couldn't keep up with Monk here. Everyone immediately jumped into the trees, starting to climb after the man in black. Dan was left below alone. True, at that time, the examiner himself believed that the test for the children was quite difficult. Just when he thought that it was worth waiting for them a little, he saw one boy on his tail, realizing that there was no point in giving in to them. The guys got a crazy dose of adrenaline. Passing the test was no longer so important. The goal was to become the first among their peers. The guys ran after each other, sometimes overtaking, sometimes helping. Everyone had fun. The guys were approaching, and as they approached, other people were getting ready. And Ray was once again convinced that it would be more convenient to move on all fours. However, as soon as he thought about it, he heard a whistling sound cutting through the air. Those were arrows flying towards them. Everyone immediately began to dodge to avoid being hit. The examiner warned everyone to be more careful. The colleagues met right in the process. The guy said that the children were really good. She should see for herself. But the girl advised the guy not to hold back and continue moving forward. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to cope on his own. Someone announced that the test had begun. The students didn't understand right away. Then they got it. The two tests were combined. The boys each took a bow and a quiver of arrows in their hands, while the examiner explained that they needed to hit the targets that would be further in the forest. The fourth test, called the Eye of Accuracy, began. The guys ran forward. Ray ran forward with arrows, but the dragon's gaze helped him see an arrow flying at a man. He had to be saved. The guy managed to push away the man at whom the arrow was flying, but he himself was hit and could not dodge. But, fortunately for him, all this was noticed by their friend, who managed to shoot a second arrow. It's strange that during the exam they, not even freshmen yet, were subjected to such blows. The girl asked how they were, but Gary reassured her, saying that everything was fine, and then thanked her for her help. The arrows kept flying, but one of the arrows that was fired had a chi that was clearly not the same as what the examiner would have fired. Someone really wanted to kill them all this time, and maybe it was him. The guy pulled the bowstring to fire back, but the red-haired man slightly miscalculated his strength, and the bow broke into two parts with a characteristic sound. At this time, the examiner was already running up to them to help. She also noticed another arrow with chi. She was too strong. Even she herself had difficulty dodging her. She also understood that they wanted to get rid of the students. The girl told the boys that they would continue the test, apologizing for the missed arrow, but Ray understood from her words that it was clearly not she who had fired it. However, it was impossible not to pass the test, so all three moved on, pursued by very dangerous guys. After everyone got there, the test was over. The guys stood and told Scavia everything. She immediately told them to contact the knights to sort it out, but Ray and Gary immediately rejected this idea. The examiner hid everything either so that it would not affect their grade, or to deliberately hide the fact of the attack itself. Ray suggested taking things step by step, starting with finding out who this man was hiding in the shadows. The guys now realized that no matter what the outcome, whether predicted or unforeseen, there was someone from the top standing behind all of this. At this time, the culprit of such heated discussions was already moving deeper into the building, trying to remain in the shadows. But they shouted at his back for him to freeze. It seemed he couldn't hide. He would have to fight back. The girl pulled the bowstring, asking what the man in black wanted from the children, but only silence answered. And yet, threatening him with violence, she should have immediately put her words into reality, because the man in black, his eyes flashing, decided to accept the challenge. The fifth test was willpower, which tested how well the students could control their kui. The sword was made from the crystal of a high-ranking monster, a firebird, and as soon as a person took it in their hands, it would release flames. Of course, it was unlikely that they could control their ki completely, but they were worth trying. Ian went first. The guy took the sword in his hands, freezing. A minute later, he released a crazy stream of flame. The man from the shadows was kneeling before the chief. The examiner found out about the murder. He had to kill her. which means that soon everyone will find out about it. However, Elder Gibby was not very upset. He did not expect to solve his problem immediately. However, now their comrades knew that the Pureblood Guild had never disappeared. One of the last was Gary. The guy did well in this test. It seems like a white belt could be waiting for him. Delbert praised the young man and called the next one. The last one was Ray. His friend gave him a high five, ordering him to pass the test properly. As soon as Gary was freed, Scavia approached him, asking about the red-haired man's strength. The guy thought for a moment, and then said that his friend was really strong, even though he had shown terrible results in the tests. Then the blonde said that 10 years ago, when they were attacked by a demonic wolf of average strength, Ray was able to defeat it and save his friend and sister. Dan, who was also listening, of course didn't believe it, but Scavia wondered about the reason why the guy could hide such potential. The guy took the sword in his hands. A system immediately appeared nearby. Knight Delbert ordered to begin the test. However, instead, he began to read a notification from the same system. He had a crystal of a large monster in his hands. He could absorb it. The guy started waving his sword, but nothing worked. The flame didn't come out. Everyone started watching carefully. But besides the fact that the flame was not coming, the sword itself also went out. Sir Delbert snatched the sword from the hands of the youth to check what was wrong with it. The examiner immediately began to scold him for spoiling the treasure of the kingdom of Arul, asking what he did with it. But he himself said that he was under his control. It was such a powerful weapon, he could not do anything with it. However, he was interrupted from his public flogging by a knight who came to tell him something very important. Ray listened carefully to what they were whispering about. The guard's words shocked him. All the guys were sent to rest. The tests were finished. The examiner of the 4th test was killed. At this time, Knight Winford was already walking with other knights to check the body. The girl was already dead, but the body was not yet cold. The man ordered an urgent meeting of the Council of Elders, as the disciples were in danger first and foremost. The elders talked about what happened. All the evidence indicated that a master was at work. In addition, the killer did not touch the security system, which means that someone was working from the inside. It seems that the rumors were justified. Whether it was a pure blood guild or a dark guild that was behind this, it was worth investigating it to the end. The day of the belt presentation arrived and everyone stood in the main hall waiting for the ceremony to begin. While Ray was thinking about killing the examiner, the guys got to know each other, learning something. The guy understood that to commit such a crime one would need to have considerable power. But his friend distracted him from his thoughts. He started to tell him something, but seeing that they weren't listening to him, he immediately started to scold him. The guy made excuses that he was busy with exams and thinking about them. But no one believed him, and it was clear why. Scavia assumed that he was thinking about the man, shooting arrows in an attempt to kill them, but he began to deny it. The guys were interrupted by the announcement of the knight's appearance in the hall. The ceremony was about to begin. Winford, as always, stood at the front, beginning the ceremony by explaining the rules and procedure. Gary Brubard was called first. Everyone started whispering. The first kid to come out was the one who had passed all the tests flawlessly. The guys looked at him with admiration. Some were envious, some saw him as an object of adoration. The guy walked out on stage and Ray rubbed his bruised cheeks, glad they'd left him alone. The first knight announced the presentation of the black belt. A whisper of surprise went through the hall. The others also did not understand anything. Next on stage was Ian, who was awarded a white belt. Some were whispering, others were silent, afraid of this shy guy. Scavia was also given a white belt. The girl was like Gary, but in female form she was also perfect. Martha received a green belt, as did her mother, and Dan stood there looking upset about his red belt. Ray was the last one to go. Everyone froze. Everyone remembered how badly he had passed the tests. Everyone was waiting for him to be given a red belt. The boy also hoped for a red belt, but the Council of Elders decided to award him a black belt. Dan was furious. He tried hard and passed all the tests, but received a red belt, remaining the weakest. Ray looked at the plaque in his hands, not understanding how he could get a black belt if he tried to fail everything. Ray had a hidden talent. The elders saw it, so they decided to give him a black belt most likely, but why Gary was not given a white belt was not clear. At this time, Mr. K was looking at the list of his charges. It seemed that 2 reds had been slipped to him. He lit a cigarette, blowing out acrid smoke. He thought these 2 would cause him trouble, but he hoped for the best. Everyone was leaving on business. Some were going to rest in the hostel, and only Gary, Ray, Kale, and Monk were standing on the street. The boys were waiting for their mentor, who was late, and the most talkative was Kale, who waited the most. He hoped that he would be a normal person, but he said it out loud, so that their mentor, who arrived on time, heard everything. The man, smoking a cigarette, said that he would be the future mentor and told everyone to follow him. They walked silently, no one knew what to say. Only Kale was interested in the man's name, so the guys advised him to ask. He did so, started shouting at him, asking for his name. In his humble opinion, Ray, he was too straightforward. The man in black replied that his name should be K, continuing to walk and not looking back at the children. True. On the way they met the knight Delbert, smiling slyly. He greeted the man, who nodded in response. The blonde noticed that 2 reds had come under the man's command and that it would not be easy for him. Delbert, even though he was a grown man, decided to pester the child, saying that he wouldn't have allowed him to take the exams. But the red-haired man didn't lose his head, and said that he was glad that people like Delbert didn't have a voice. Delbert promised to keep an eye on the guy. But before he could finish speaking, a blade appeared between him and the guy. It was Mr. K's sword. He reminded that Ray is part of his team, and he will not allow anyone to be biased towards his charges. But Delbert just chuckled wryly, saying that soon everyone would see if it was bias. He believed that sooner or later everyone would find out that the prophecy was false, and then he left. The children immediately began to whisper about the prophecy, not understanding what the man was talking about. Kay also thought about it. The next day began early in the morning. The boys were woken up, forgetting to wake them up, and then the man led them to the western wing of the academy. The doors opened, a crazy wind was blowing. There was a draft, the guys even closed their eyes. Everyone went inside, but looking around, the guys did not notice at all that Mr. K was missing. Kale was the first to notice this, followed by a loud bang. It was the door. Ray activated his dragon eye mode to find the man, but it was no use. It was as if he had disappeared. Gary asked Ray if he saw the man, but before his friend could answer, Mr. K put his arm around their shoulders and asked who they were looking for. A squeaky cry of fear echoed throughout the building, and the mentor turned on the candles, illuminating the building. From that day on, all training sessions were to be conducted in the dark in order to improve their skills. Also, the darkness will allow them to sharpen their senses. They must get used to it. They must be in the shadows. Gary asked Mr. K what exactly they, as Black Belt Knights, would be doing, and he replied that they would be primarily killing. The boy was upset, thinking that they were not appreciated, but the mentor said that they were considered the best of the best and the strongest of the strongest. Gary froze, listening to the elder's words, seeming to calm down a little. Maybe everything wasn't so bad. Next, Mr. K, also known as Mr. K, handed out bracelets to the kids that showed their rating. The man explained that from that day on, they could train the way they liked best. Ray lay down after training, looking at his watch, which displayed the participants' rating and the status of the current training. The red-haired man was ranked 300th, according to Sir K. The rating was updated every day after the end of training. Students could arrange rating battles, and if a student with a lower rank won, all the achievements of the second one would be attributed to him. Ray decided to ask the blonde how many students there were in the course in order to understand where he was. There were exactly 300 of them. The realization hit his pride, while Dan was asking the guys what their rating was. You should have seen the guy's face when he found out that Gary had first place in the entire course. It's not surprising. But Dan immediately started making fun of the fact that first and 300th place were such close friends. While Dan decided to go for a walk so as not to get hit, Scavia only reproached the guys for their nasty character. Of all of them, Monk was the happiest, Ian noticed, but he just waved it off, saying that everything was fine. The guy trained hard, and his rating gradually increased, which made him incredibly happy and motivated him to work further. And so the days passed in the boys' room, and one of those days, the dragon, returning from hunting, saw a pleasant picture. Actually, it was nothing pleasant. There was a noise in the room, some kind of skirmish between Monk and Gary. Monk argued that the special training was effective, as it helped him improve his rating. But Gary insisted otherwise. Gary claimed that he had been maintaining his rating comfortably all this time. And without this exercise, Monk had nothing to answer for. Dan said he had never seen Monk so excited before. Dan said he was curious about the special exercises to get a black belt. Ray thought about it. He understood that his friend was lacking in stealth and camouflage skills, while Monk was very good at them. However, Gary's training was many times better than the second one in all respects. Although the dark-haired one's skills had improved, the first one was still first in the ranking. While Ray was thinking about the reason for the dispute and comparing them, drawing conclusions, Scavia approached him with a request for help. He suggested organizing a competition to understand and practice who was right, for which he received a scolding from Scavia. Nevertheless, the disputants themselves decided that the option was not bad, and it was decided to arrange a rating match. The next day, a tournament was already being held between the guys, and Kale generally began collecting bets from people. Everyone was talking about the upcoming match. Even Delbert's youngest son had heard about it. Dan, having heard about the bets, also ran to bet on Gary. It was profitable. though Scavia almost killed the guy. Then Marta decided to place a bet. She liked Monk, so she decided to bet on him. Scavia, somewhat puzzled by the situation, decided to consult with Ray, asking if Monk had a chance. Kale began to announce the start of the tournament. Ray noted that she also considered Gary the clear winner in this fight. The guy, holding a box with bets, waved his hand. Let the battle begin. The stands buzzed in anticipation. The fight started. Ray kept talking to Scavia. Gary was talented and knew his way around different techniques, and Monk was working hard all the time on his special training. Ray boldly called Monk the most suitable opponent for his friend. Besides, a direct fight is one thing, and their future work, for which they were prepared, is another. Monk attacked the guy hard. Gary defended himself very well, not allowing Monk to hurt him. The fight was not easy. As Ray said, Monk was indeed a worthy opponent for Gary. The guy was already happy because he felt his victory. Someone from the stands supported him, telling him to go to the end. But even though the blonde had to sweat, he wasn't going to lose to anyone. Gary made it clear to the guy that he should give up because he couldn't beat the guy. He didn't get first place for nothing. Monk's technique had improved to the point that Gary had to be careful with the guy. Ray knew that. However, the red-haired man was still on his friend's side. There were still many gaps in Monk's basic training. The guys watched with excitement, each one understanding that one of them would have a hard time later. However, Monk was clearly losing ground. Gary Brubard made the final blow, breaking his opponent's weapon. Monk fell to his knees, not understanding how it had happened. Victory had literally slipped out of his hands. He couldn't justify himself. Anger and disappointment were multiplied by each other, and by 3, the goal was victory. As Gary started to walk off the field, Monk grabbed the gun. Ray saw it. It seemed like things were bad. The guy, not holding back his aggression, rushed at the guy, wanting to prove his point, wanting to emerge victorious. The guys were screaming. Some were trying to stop Monk. Some were trying to warn Gary. Gary turned around too late, but Ray did, preventing a real disaster. The stands froze. The friends were puzzled, not understanding how the third one managed to come to them. Ray tried to reach out to their neighbor, trying to stop him. Gary tried to understand what could have happened. As soon as the dark-haired man came to his senses, he immediately threw away the broken piece of the weapon, apologizing to Ray and Gary. Scavia still couldn't understand how the guy managed to move there so quickly. No one had time to understand anything, and Ray even managed to prevent it. Monk began to apologize to the guys, justifying himself by saying that he was too impulsive. But they were not angry, deep down each of them, but understood Monk. At this point, everyone was sitting in the stands and discussing what had happened, not understanding who had won. Some were for Gary, others for Monk. At this time, Kale himself was eavesdropping on the fans' conversations. He began to say that everything would be decided, and then he would give everyone the money. But people began to think that the third one's exit was a setup by the guy in order to keep the money for himself. The guys immediately started leaving the stadium. Monk and Gary covered Ray, who was hit by a wave of anger and negativity. The friends tried their best, but someone still managed to throw a stone at the guy, hitting him in the temple. Everyone started asking others to stop this farce, but the one who suffered the most was an innocent person. Gary, who was holding his friend so that he wouldn't fall from blood loss, asked how he was. They should have called someone, but the red-haired man said that everything was fine. The girls also tried to help and somehow smooth out the situation. Their friend really didn't deserve this. Sebastian looked at his friend with an indifferent gaze, who was about to throw a stone at the red-haired man. As soon as he swung, a stone hit his wrist, causing his palm to open in pain, throwing the stone out of his hand. It was Monk who asked the boy not to do it, but in response only threats were heard. No one seemed to hear the kid. Sebastian looked at Monk not with indifference, but with a very angry look, as if he was thirsting for revenge, his green eyes sparkling unkindly. The guy only heard various insults directed at him. Nothing changed after moving from the village. It seemed like people hadn't changed at all. Their eyes were filled with anger, and a fire of rage and disappointment burned inside. However, everything became quiet in an instant, and then people began to whisper about the sudden appearance of the knight Winford. Someone thought he had already made a bet. The friends were talking about something among themselves. Ray heard everything. As soon as Winford approached the guys, Gary told him that the red-haired man had lost a lot of blood and needed help. He started to wave it off, saying that everything was fine, but the man replied that his mother was waiting for him. Scarlett stood in the room, waiting for her son to arrive. The reason for his arrival was not clear. As soon as Ray's head was bandaged, he immediately ran into the room to see his mother. The woman looked at her son, not believing how much he had grown, while Winford stood outside the door, listening attentively to their conversation. The boy began asking his mother how his father was doing, hoping that she had come to tell him that he was feeling better. But the woman told him that his father had left, and the boy froze. trying to understand what exactly his mother meant. The boy recoiled, not believing what he heard. But she hastened to calm him down. She said that his father had left the village. The boy began to ask how this was possible if he was bedridden due to the shadow plague. The man did not have the courage to tell the boy the whole truth about the shadow plague. Even those who survived the infection eventually became carriers. Mom said she accidentally found out that Dad had been fighting the shadow plague for the past 10 years. She said that one night, while walking through the house, she heard a sound in the bedroom where Jack was lying. Entering the room, she saw her husband sitting at the table and writing something, with sheets of paper lying around. She called him. He turned around, looked tired, called his wife in a quiet voice, smiling barely noticeably. She immediately ran to her husband, hugging him. She hoped that everything was over, that finally they would be together. It was as if she didn't hear the words the guy was whispering, but he was saying that he couldn't, that he was losing control again. The girl cried with happiness, but after her husband asked her to kill him, her face changed. She started to deny it. She couldn't do that. How could she raise her hand against him? In a second, the guy's eyes were covered in darkness. A shadow plague began to crawl across his face, and he began to whisper about her killing him. The man grabbed his head. Scarlet did not understand how to help him. She could not reach him. In a second, a purple light spread throughout the house. The candle fell, and the woman fell with it. A man struck by the plague began to ask to be killed. A candle flame burned around him, and the woman could only cry. She couldn't stop him, only tearfully asking her husband to come back, while the flame from the candle flared up around her. The shadow monster only asked her to kill him. The woman could do nothing, only looked, numb, at her one-time husband. The guy listened with bated breath, and by the end of the story he couldn't help but ask herself if she had done it. The girl, of course, did not do this, but she said that the father left something for the boy. She said that she decided to give it to him personally. The envelope passed from hand to hand. The guy took the thing. He froze for a second, and then opened the envelope. Taking out a letter, he began to read the written lines. My father said that he remembered the day when he and his mother saw him. They immediately understood that he was special. He said that he knew that he had entered the academy, that he had tried, and that his father was very proud of his son. He regretted that he could not be by his side, but he sincerely believed that he could achieve everything he set his mind to. It looked like a real farewell. A tear ran down his cheek. The guy believed that he would find a way to cure his dad. The boy was lying in the bedroom after talking with his mother, thinking about her words, with his father's letter in his hands. Mom told him that she would go in search of his father. She promised to find him, no matter what he turned into. The guy wanted to go with her, asked her, but she refused to take him. She knew that Dad would also be against it. She was glad to see her son after so much time, but asked him not to worry about anything. The guy nodded then. He understood that 10 years had passed. In 10 years he had not been able to do anything, and the people around him had not become better either. He was unable to avenge the death of his people. He was unable to protect his loved ones, and Gary, who entered, distracted him from his depressing thoughts. He assumed that he had already seen his aunt since he was sitting there, and so he asked how she was and whether his father had recovered. But he, ignoring all the questions, answered only a short yes, and then left the room. The blonde looked after him. He felt that something was wrong with the guy. He knew him too well. The guy's attention was drawn to a piece of paper that was lying on the floor near the red-haired man's bed. He immediately took the letter to read it, but while he was reading, he did not notice how someone made his way into the bedroom. It was Dan, who snatched the letter abruptly, hoping to find something in it to laugh at his friend. He began to fight, trying to snatch the letter, but friends entered the room, hearing the words about the love letter. The boys sat in the room, each one silent. It was difficult. No one even imagined that their friend had such a difficult childhood. They realized they should have been nicer to the guy. Monk thought for a moment, saying nothing. The next day, Ray noticed that all his roommates seemed to have gone crazy, for example in the dining room. He was calmly walking to eat when Marta and Skavia approached him and invited him to have dinner together. After dinner, in his room, he saw perfectly folded clothes on the bed, which he himself had not exactly folded. He didn't put them together at all. But then Dan and Ian came up to him and started talking about Skavia, and he seemed to understand who did it. Something was clearly not right. Some fly had suddenly bitten these guys. Such attention was stressing him out. The next day, he found Gary picking lilies and putting them in a vase. The second one immediately began to make excuses. The red-haired man winced, asking if his friend had fallen in love with him, but he immediately began to deny it. Ray decided to ask directly what the guys had been up to lately, and Gary had to tell him everything. He said that it was all because of a letter that he accidentally found. The guy understood that he was to blame. He really didn't want to lose a friend like Ray, but it turned out that the guy wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, He said thank you. They were distracted by noise outside the door. Familiar voices were shouting something excitedly. The guys began to listen. A minute later, the guys entered the room, dragging Monk, who looked barely alive. Gary immediately started asking what happened. Dan started telling him that it was all about Sebastian. He provoked Monk and had a ratings fight with him. But he did not finish it because Monk passed out and was unable to admit defeat. That guy kept hitting him without stopping. The guys thought he did it on purpose. The red-haired man sat next to his friend, who only asked for forgiveness for not being able to help his friend in any way those days. Scavia told Ian to find a doctor immediately because the boy had a lot of fractures. Ray stood up silently and walked out of the room. And Gary immediately followed him, asking where he was going. The guy was determined, as if his aura had become dangerous, pinning the blonde to the spot. Ray was going to take revenge. The guy was walking down the corridor, but Gary stopped him, urging him not to act impulsively. Ray offered him to go with him, but he refused. He would like to avenge his friend together with the guy, but they shouldn't get involved in this. Scavia joined in, saying that the guy was Sir Delbert's son, so they couldn't touch him. But the dragon stood his ground. That guy deserved a thrashing, he had to give him one. Gary tried to shout at the departing guy that he could be expelled, but he still decided to do it his own way. He promised to pass the qualifying rounds and then take proper revenge on that arrogant guy. Everyone was standing, training, and the blonde one was in charge of everything, standing out from the rest with his green eyes. The training was interrupted by Ray, who arrived, but he was stopped, saying that training was in progress, but he demanded to show him Sebastian. However, the reaction to this was quite mixed. No one remembered any red-haired people in the nobleman's circle. At this point, the same Eric who Monk had stopped after his battle with Gary intervened in the dispute. This same Eric was indignant, saying something about manners. It was funny. That same guy was standing behind and looking arrogantly. Eric also said that they were training, so he should leave. But Ray repeated the same thing, that he needed Sebastian. Someone's voice was heard, which stopped the guy. The green-eyed man said that he was that very Sebastian. Looking at the guy's black belt, he realized that he came because of his friend. But Ray realized that he could get straight to the point. He sent a challenge to the guy for a rating fight, but he declined it. The red-haired man assumed that he was chickening out. The blonde just laughed and said that he should have forgotten about it. After all, they were on different levels. It was all about the ratings. He thought Monk was the nerd of them all, but he turned out to be too stubborn. He apologized hypocritically, once again drawing attention to the fact that there were so many differences between them and ordinary people. However, Sebastian's friend came to his aid, and he was not against fighting, like a dog that wanted to finish off its owner. He said he was ranked 9th, so the guy's victory could give him a chance to fight Sebastian. Eric immediately looked at his friend, seeking his permission and approval, and he gave his consent. Ray immediately asked if the green-eyed man would accept his challenge after he defeated that guy. He didn't even doubt his victory. Everyone began to whisper about a new impending battle. It all started with Eric trying to hit. He attacked first, but the second one didn't even draw his sword. Everyone began to watch with interest, and Sebastian only laughed at the fact that his friend was once again making fun of the kids. He hoped to pull off the trick Sebastian had taught him. He saw a great opportunity to show off. The guy tried, of course, but the first attack was a complete failure. The red-haired one dodged. In principle, the next attack was also a failure, but he believed that this was not the end. Each of his attacks was not even reflected. Ray Tarun, going out without a sword against a senior student, simply dodged. He didn't let himself be touched, as if he was playing with the guy. And the guy, in an attempt to touch his opponent, lost his vigilance. The guy took advantage of this. While he was thinking about how the boy was able to dodge his attack, the boy was already behind him. A second to realize it, and then a fist hits Eric in the face, causing him to lose his balance. The sword falls from the blonde man's hands, and he himself flies back a couple of meters. The blow was too strong. Eric couldn't say anything. The place where he had been hit was very swollen, and he himself was on the verge of consciousness. Ray walked up to the one he came here for, asking if he could fight him now. He just grinned, saying that he saw no point in giving him a fight, and Eric was carried away from behind to the infirmary. Ray took 2 medium monster crystals out of his pocket and pointed at them, saying that he would give them to him if he won. The guy was shocked. Where did the boy get such crystals from? He understood that if he got such things, he would have a lot of problems later. But Ray calmed him down, saying that his parents were mercenaries. They gave them to him. The blonde still had a chance to get them. The next day, most of the academy gathered at the stadium to watch the fight of Delbert's son himself. At this time, Ray and Kale were walking to the place where the fight was taking place. The latter did not believe that his friend was going to seriously fight with such a person. He assumed that he wanted to make a killing on his defeat, but the guy clearly wasn't going to spare him. Ray told him to calmly collect bets and not to worry about anything, promising, at the very least, to break the guy's nose. While Kale was collecting bets, everyone around was wondering how long Ray would last. Only Scavia thought that Sebastian wouldn't survive. Dan mocked her by talking about love, and she was ready to kill him for such jokes. At this time, only Gary stood alone, looking forward. He was not worried about his friend. He believed that he would win. But he was worried about Delbert's reaction to this fight. Ray, having said goodbye to Kale, entered the arena. Sebastian was already standing, looking smugly at his opponent. The children of knights will become knights, and the children of peasants will become peasants. Ray couldn't forgive this guy. He had to answer for everything. Even though he looked relaxed and peaceful, the guy guessed that inside he was completely different. The blonde's classmate announced that both sides should take their places. The red-haired one listened to the arrogant speeches of the pompous nobleman. Sebastian got ready. He planned from the very beginning to defeat the guy with his signature attack. The guy who was acting as a second began the count. The guys watched attentively, listening to him count to 1. Everyone was tense to the limit, each one worried about the other. Ray just pulled the mask over his face. The guy's bright red hair was pulled back into a ponytail. It was hard to understand what he was thinking. His expression was unreadable. The second shouted loudly about the start of the fight. Sebastian immediately went on the attack, believing that now everything would end, and anticipating victory. A cloud of smoke rose up in the arena. Gary screamed, worried about the guy. The others couldn't utter a word. The stands were raging. However, the second-year student's attack was unsuccessful. Ray calmly dodged. He began to say that the red-haired man was lucky, but he himself had no luck at all so far. Ray, dodging his attacks, was able to hit him himself. His cheek was wounded. Thin drops of blood were running down it. Sebastian didn't even notice it right away. He merely wiped the blood from his face, saying that the wound was not deep, and that the boy should have tried harder, otherwise he would never be able to defeat him. Ray was amazed at how much he talked. He asked if he fought all his battles with his mouth, shocking Delbert Jr. The blonde could no longer tolerate such impudence, so he decided to go on the offensive, deciding that the boy was just lucky. That's why he was still here. However, this attack didn't work either. Ray was able to calmly dodge, leaving him to fly forward, the anger on the guy's face gradually giving way to surprise. A second later, a new wound appeared on the other cheek, from which blood gushed. The clothes on the left arm were cut, the skin was damaged, and blood also gushed from there. The guys in the stands were in shock. No one had time to notice how their friend managed to attack the enemy. Sebastian's face looked like he had been wounded before his attack. Gary looked at his friend with some admiration. No one had time to notice anything. He did not understand when his friend had managed to learn this, while remaining at the very bottom of the rankings. The moves the red-haired man used to avoid Sebastian's attacks were very similar to the ones Mr. K used. This situation greatly undermined the blonde, who, worried about his reputation, decided to use Ki, and a blue flame began to flare up. Everyone looked at the son of one of the country's first knights with surprise and admiration, expecting something interesting and spectacular. Sebastian ran forward, straight at the red-haired man, wanting to finally finish with the guy. Ki concentrated on the tip of the sword. The stands rejoiced with joy at seeing something like this. Very rarely did something so worthwhile dilute their daily school routine. Ray hadn't responded to any of the attacks this whole time. He was just dodging. At least that's what Sebastian thought, and then he believed that he was in control of the situation. Everyone around thought that Sebastian was leading, and so they loudly supported the blonde, trying to help him morally. Dan, at this time, standing with the guys, thought that things were bad. Sooner or later, the second-year student had to get to him. He, like the rest of the spectators, did not see the main thing. But Gary reassured him, saying that their friend would definitely be okay. And Scavia explained that if you looked closely, you could see something very interesting. The one who was really losing ground during this time was Sebastian. The guy was gradually becoming weaker. The audience was in shock. No one saw the freshman attack at all. While it turned out that the blonde was all injured, Dan was surprised that he didn't even notice anything. Every time Ray dodged Sebastian's attack, he would make at least one counterattack, constantly wearing down his opponent. Ray wanted him to finally stop holding back. The second-year student shouted that he had never received such a scolding even from his father. It was nice to hear that. Somewhere deep down, Ray was pleased with himself. Sebastian screamed that he would destroy the guy, rushing at him again, which only a fool would hope for. However, Ray Taron had no intention of sparing the bastard, so he beat him very diligently every time he attacked. Dan was in shock, not understanding how the guy could be so strong, but Scavia didn't understand why he was dragging his feet if he could have finished everything a long time ago. Gary said that most likely he was doing it on purpose. He was like an animal that was flirting with its prey. The red-haired one was just tormenting him. Sebastian cried in pain, feeling pain all over his face. He understood that the guy had slashed him as much as he could. Ray wanted to avenge Monk. He mercilessly hit him in the face, including without feeling any remorse or any pity. The blonde's friends, or as Ray called them, his sidekicks, didn't know what to say. The red-haired man was a real monster. The blonde threatened his opponent, saying that he should stay after the fight if he had even a drop of courage. He said that he was an undead, but Ray only considered it necessary to answer that the words of Sebastian and others like him were just empty words for him. The second-year student, seeing that his opponent was going to attack him again, began to shout that he wanted to surrender, but he didn't have time. He simply didn't have time. Ray landed a precise punch to the face, not letting him finish his sentence. He didn't want to end this fight so quickly. For him it was like a public spanking. He wanted him to get what he owed Monk in full. He didn't want his opponent to admit defeat so easily. The guys understood that this would not lead to anything good. He could seriously injure the guy. But he was stopped by a shout from somewhere in the stands. Ray froze. Monk came out of some arch in bandages and a cast, with a crutch under his arms, shouting something to the guy, trying to draw attention to himself. Ray looked at the guy and didn't understand why he was asking him to stop. His human race still confused him. As soon as the guy was distracted, the blonde immediately shouted that he was giving up, not wanting to get hit even harder on his wounded face. The second announced that the fight was over. The victory was Ray Tarun's. Gary ran to his friend as soon as it was over. At this time, Sebastian's friends were already trying to bring the blonde to his senses in order to take him to the infirmary and help him with the bandages. However, the guy whose reputation was damaged began to shout that no one should touch him. He saw humiliation in accepting someone's help. The red-haired man left the arena with his friend, wanting to rest as soon as possible, and the green-eyed man looked after his opponent, thinking about how to take revenge later. The very next day, Knight Delbert gathered the Council of Elders to demand punishment for the red-haired man. But Mr. K, who was present, did not allow it. He made it clear that his protégé had acted strictly by the rules, which the knight himself should not have ignored. But he claimed that because of the rules the boy was still alive. The son of one of the first knights had his entire face smashed. The father sincerely believed that he did it on purpose. He was right. He was taking revenge for Monk. One of the elders supported the knight, remembering the prophecy, part of which said that the boy could destroy all living things. They should not take the risk. However, another elder reminded about the second part of the prophecy, which said that the boy could become the savior of the world. The elders began to discuss. They believed that he could cause a great disaster, so they should act with great caution. They understood that it was possible to expel the boy, but this could lead to the death of humanity, so it was decided to vote. The elder asked who was in favor of expelling Ray Taran from the academy and asked for a show of hands. Delbert was the first to raise his hands, without even hesitating. Elder Gibby and Knight Master Ichiro, who were extremely unfavorable towards the young man, raised their hands along with him. Next, those who were against expelling the child from the academy were ordered to raise their hands. For example, Elder Feng and Elder Da were against it. Elder Hancock also did not think it was appropriate to expel the boy. He was the one who believed that expulsion could lead to tragic consequences. Among those against were Mr. K, Knight Winford, and Knight Bernardo. It was time to sum up the voting results. At this time, Ray, whose fate was being decided at the level of the Council of Elders, was lying on the roof alone, thinking about something. His solitude was interrupted by a voice that belonged to Scavia. The girl looked for him everywhere, but could not find him. So she decided to look on the roof and was right. The guy sat up and said he just wanted to be alone for a bit. She looked at his face. He seemed to be thinking about Monk. The girl was right. I wonder how exactly she was able to guess, because she was absolutely right. He looked into her eyes. The girl froze for a second after the guy's question. She didn't know what exactly to say to her friend and how to support him. Perhaps he really was not like them. He, in her opinion, was not very sociable and did not think like others. The guy stood up, approaching the railing. He didn't really care. He didn't want to talk about it with anyone. But the girl immediately began to justify herself. She said that she didn't mean what the guy thought at all. She meant that he was a good person in any case. Whenever she saw the red-haired man confused or angry, she really wanted to help him somehow. She, and the others, really wanted Ray to trust them, his friends. The guy froze. His hands tightly gripped the railing. What kind of friends were we talking about? The guy turned around abruptly, grabbing the girl and pressing her against the wall. She screamed in fear, pressing her hands to herself. Ray activated the Dragon Eye mode, showing the girl a piece of his true self. The girl paid attention immediately. He looked straight into her eyes, quietly whispering to her, asking if she was afraid of him, and she could not utter a word, not from fear, but from the absurdity of the situation. The girl spoke honestly, decided not to lie. After all, she started a conversation about trust. Sometimes she really was afraid of him. But she still didn't consider him a bad person, as she had already said. Besides, she liked the guy's eye. She considered him handsome. The girl smiled warmly at her classmate, who was still pinning her against the wall, and told him to stop thinking of himself as a monster. Ray turned off the dragon eye mode, looking at the girl in shock. She didn't consider him a monster. He wasn't a monster. The boy walked away from her, not knowing what to say. Every time he felt like he saw the true essence of people, everything immediately changed before his eyes. He raised his eyes to the sky. It seemed that he still had much to experience on the path to understanding humanity. After the meeting of the Council of Elders, Delbert came out extremely angry. The prophecy was just getting in the way. He was ready to kill this guy. However, he was stopped by a voice. One of the elders called him, forcing him to turn around. He stared at him, letting go of his anger a little. He asked how he could be of service to the elder, but he only smiled and, waving his hand, said that it was nothing special. He, passing by, patted him on the shoulder and said that he had heard his opinion that all knights should be of noble birth. He thought it was a very interesting point of view, so he was going to watch it closely. Scavia, after talking with the guy, was going down in a relatively high mood on the way she saw some guy who was looking for Ray. She said that the red-haired man upstairs thanked her, calling her young lady. He was surprisingly polite. She didn't answer. The man looked somehow familiar, but she definitely didn't remember him being from their class. The guy was lying on the roof, basking in the rays of the setting sun, until he heard approaching footsteps. He thought that Scavia had returned, but he was wrong. Instead, he heard a male voice, which politely informed him that he did not seem to be who he was taken for. The guy stood up, looking at who exactly had disturbed him. In front of him stood a tall, green-eyed blonde man who introduced himself as Harry Delbert. He was a second-year student. The surname immediately made itself known. He immediately understood that he was a relative of Sebastian came to him. He nodded, saying that the guy was not mistaken. He defeated his brother in battle today. Then Ray assumed that he came for revenge. But Harry stopped him immediately, saying that it was not about that. He wanted first of all to thank him for what he did. Ray was surprised, but not for long. Right after he said that his younger brother was a bit of a fool. He thought that was all, and wanted to go about his business, but he stopped him. He asked him not to leave so quickly. The guy, of course, could not participate in raiding battles yet, but Harry still wanted to teach him a lesson. After all, if the younger brother was defeated, the older brother simply could not stand aside. The guy thought about it. That is, he had been talking so much about how he hadn't come here for revenge. But he said that he just wanted to personally see the power of the one who was able to defeat his brother. Ray automatically stood up, watching as Harry walked away from him, handing him the sword. He turned to him, wanting to see what the red-haired boy was capable of. The guy frowned. Usually he didn't take the initiative, and he didn't like it at all. But this one was somehow different. There was no anger or aggression coming from him, as if he didn't come with a war. The guy decided to make an exception today, and so as soon as the blonde got ready, Ray made the first attack. True, Harry was not at all afraid of his attack. He reacted calmly, smiling politely. He was fundamentally different from his younger brother. He was able to calmly repel the enemy's attack. Harry praised him, saying that he made the right decision. He was surprised and pleasantly so. Ray couldn't understand how he was able to stand up to it if he dealt such a strong blow. Usually others' swords would break after him, but now his sword could break. Harry immediately saw that he didn't know how to use his chi, and Ray, who still didn't know how, decided to rely on the skills of a black belt knight, since force didn't work. He tried to attack and fight back as best he could, but he still fought back, managing to injure Ray himself, just as he had Sebastian that morning. Ray's next attack was blocked. He fell, unable to stay on his feet. It felt as if he had not been attacking all this time, but the other way around. The dragon sincerely did not understand how it happened that the man had calmly repelled all his attacks all this time. But soon the man himself began to attack the enemy, telling him to be more careful. The blow was too strong, so much so that the boy cried out in surprise as he was thrown back. He barely managed to grab onto something to keep from falling, and deep down he hoped that the guy would help him if something happened, although who knew what the aristocrat might do. He stopped and began to cough up blood. It was painful to breathe. His eyes were clouded with tears, which he stubbornly hid. The blonde looked at him with regret, and said that it seemed that was all for today. It wasn't that easy. The first year seemed quite capable to Harry. He waved his hand at him and began to walk away towards the exit from the roof, stepping on the tiles, which made noise with every touch. However, Ray, finding the strength in himself, nevertheless began to rise, asking Brother Sebastian to stop and wait for him a little. He wiped the blood from his chin and then asked what place the guy occupied in the second year. It seemed that with such strength he was first. However, the guy smiled affably again and, laughing good-naturedly, said that such a thing was impossible. As he walked away, Harry Delbert waved goodbye to the boy, telling him that he was ranked 50th in his second year. Ray couldn't believe he had heard right. With such strength, Sebastian's older brother was only the 50th. It was hard to comprehend. Harry offered the red-haired man to fight again when he would have good control over Chi. He saw potential in the boy. He did not consider him a country bumpkin. Chi, that was the main force. Ray looked at his palm, which still had blood on it. There were abrasions on his chin. Winford listened to Elder Da, who said that things were going very badly on the border, with more and more people gradually disappearing. However, the problems were not only at the border. The knight reported that people from the Dark Guild had infiltrated the academy. It was worth notifying the students. They should have taken some action, but they had more pressing problems now. The elder asked to bring 5 children. At this time, Ray was sitting on the roof, once again trying to concentrate chi in his body, but he was not succeeding at all. This time his training was interrupted by an unexpected rain. He had to finish it and go home to dry off. However, getting up from his usual place on the roof, he noticed something strange. There were some people in masks on the roofs of other buildings. He couldn't understand what was going on. He couldn't understand what these people were even thinking. It seemed like they wanted to carry out a sneak attack. They were doing something bad. At this time, Elder Da walked along unsuspectingly after meeting with Knight Winford. The masked men were preparing to attack. Ray activated the Dragon Eye mode. The people in masks immediately lit up with purple light. He immediately recognized it. It was the Shadow Plague. The red-haired man began to put on his hood, thinking that these people could have something to do with his dad. He needed to go there. At this time, the people of the Dark Guild blocked the Elder's path, saying that his path would end here. The Elder was not very surprised. Apparently the rumors about the Dark Guild infiltrating the academy were true. Winford was not lying. The guild people began to threaten, saying that Avrian would be captured. The Elder noted that there were 4 fighters for him alone. At that moment, Ray jumped out, suggesting a 4 against 2 option, which should clearly be easier. Elder Da assumed that he was a student of their academy, and Ray did not answer, only said that he was glad that he also decided to participate. At first the Shadow people did not understand who he was, but then they decided that it did not matter, because they were all going to die anyway. When everyone had sorted everything out, the Elder ordered the boy to detain 2 of the 4 opponents. Everything would soon be over. Ray watched without taking his eyes off. The old man was simply amazing. Being at that age, he had incredible strength. At this time, Ray, who was frozen in delight, was attacked by the people of darkness, whom he had to attack. It was strange that they called him small. Ray noticed that their condition was significantly different from Dad's, but they were still conscious. Their blows did not hit the guy. He hugged them, that if they hit him, he would also fall ill after his father. He would not want such a fate. The guy skillfully used the skills of a black belt knight. He was like a shadow for the shadow itself, his eyes sparkling in the night with a thirst for revenge. True, the Shadow Knights turned out to be not as stupid as he thought, so he had to sweat while the old man was fiddling with something there. They realized that the guy didn't know how to use chi. He was not a professional. Their chances of winning were getting higher and higher. Ray, hearing their dialogue, thought that they could see right through him. He decided to use all 4 limbs in battle. It was clearly more convenient. At this time, the Shadow people looked at him, not understanding what he was doing. He just took the sword in his mouth and then got on all 4s. No one did anything like that. The Knights of the Dark Guild hoped in vain to quickly deal with the guy. Right now, he became absolutely invincible. They simply could not predict his actions. He knew how to move. He hid well. The Shadow people could not reach him. At this time, Elder Da, who was able to lay down too, told the Shadow Knights to continue. The man really wanted to see what this guy was capable of, because he was definitely unusual, stood out from the others. However, the Shadow Knights themselves and Ray along with them were in shock. How could one even react to such a thing? One suggested using something that would immediately solve all their problems, but the other stopped him, deciding to get rid of the little bastard first. But Ray, listening to all this, realized that he was worried in vain. They did not see him, so he wanted to take a risk while he saw one of the possible options for his actions. After waiting for the right moment, he immediately jumped out of his hiding place, attacking 2 knights of the Dark Guild. Ray, by getting on all 4s, was able to dodge attacks faster and counterattack faster. His advantage was that he was faster, which in turn made him invisible to the Knights of the Dark Guild. The guy made another attack on them, but this time he was seen. but he still managed to strike, hitting one of them quite hard. He looked at the shadow people, not understanding why they were conscious, and whether the same could happen to Dad. He was distracted from his thoughts by an elder who told him to grab one of the knights by the hand and pull him towards himself. The guy froze, listening attentively to the elder's instructions, and then decided to move into action. Ray obediently grabbed his opponent by the arm, pulling him towards himself, and then, at the elder's command, turned around and threw the Knight of Darkness over his back. That same shadow man was thrown straight towards the wooden barrels, though he didn't know that it wasn't the end. Even Ray didn't know. The man ordered the student to step back and then, concentrating the power of Chi, began to strike at the Shadow Knight. He grabbed the arm of one of the masked men, pulling him away from the red-haired boy to finish this fight. The enemy was thrown into the wall. Chi released a lot of energy, and therefore the blow was incredibly strong. The boy looked with undisguised admiration at the old man, who possessed great strength. The last Shadow Knight did not dare to enter the battle. The old man was distracted from his entertainment. Noticing that the knights had arrived, it became noisier. The Knights of the Shadow, noticing the ambush, began to run away. Ray wanted to run after them, but he was stopped by the old man's voice. He told him to leave them and not to run after them. In addition, he noticed a notification from the system. He received a reward, mana attraction. It seemed worth stopping. While Ray was figuring out the new ability, the knights talked to the elder. The elder thanked the young man for his help, who for some reason was waiting for him. He asked why those people attacked him, but the old man only smiled, saying that he had met many strange people in his life. Ray could see that he wasn't lying, but he still felt that he was deliberately avoiding the topic. The old man noticed that the boy didn't know how to use Chi, so he advised him to join the martial arts club when he entered his second year. The man promised that the boy would be able to get the most out of it, and then disappeared. Ray looking in the direction where the elder had just been. Ray couldn't believe that he just took off and ran away. The old man was still strange, but at the same time very strong. Ray was walking back to the academy thinking about this incident. On his way to his room, he saw the knight Winford. He said that he was looking for him. The elder wanted to see him. Ray clarified what kind of elder the elder wanted to see. It seems he was exposed so quickly. The elder stood at this time and waited for all 5 children to arrive, the last one being Ray, who had been searched for the longest. He was distracted by a knock on the door. Winford brought the last remaining one. The elder invited them in, starting a conversation. All the guys were already standing in the room. Ray didn't understand why they were gathered there. Everyone who was in the room had red hair. The elder thanked the boys for giving him a little time, but they immediately began to say that they would only be glad. The elder noticed that the young people were very impatient, as always, and he said that he had called them here because of the prophecy. Everyone immediately began to listen attentively, not understanding what prophecy was being discussed. Ray and Kale, who had heard something from Delbert, began to listen attentively. 10 years ago, a divine prophecy was announced. It said that a red-haired boy was to save the Earth when it was on the verge of total devastation. Kale immediately picked up on this, showing a positive attitude. It seemed like one of them could be that boy. The man said that for several years now they have been sending knights on search operations to find such a child. They were able to find 10 red-haired children who fit the description in the prophecy. Ray didn't quite understand. He said 10, but there were only 5 of them in the room. The remaining 5 were somewhere. It seemed he wasn't the only one who thought so, because the next second, the very straightforward Kale began to speak out about it, asking where the others were. The elder said that the other 5 had awakened magical abilities and were now studying at Roland's academy. Ray immediately remembered Amy, wondering how she was now. The guys were each thinking about their own things. Ian was dreamily talking about magic. The twins Huang and Duo were thinking about saving the world, and one of them was quite passive. Only Kale was extremely happy. It seemed that this guy was generally full of enthusiasm and energy. The old man said that it could be all of them, or maybe just one of them. That's why they were here. Once upon a time, 5 dragon knights saved this continent from disaster. They built the Avrian Academy. They protected the common people. These knights, defeating monsters, left behind a priceless legacy that they had to preserve. They had to try hard to do so. In the future, in addition to basic training and special training for various belts, they were to be assigned a lot of additional training. It was decided to make these 5 the new Dragon Knights of the Avrian Academy. The guys left the Elder's office completely different. If Juan was happy, then Duo was completely the opposite. Kale was simply happy. Ian and Ray were thinking about their own. Ray decided to ask Ian if he was born like this. He replied that they are all like this, which is why they had a lot of problems in childhood. They were all born that way. Red was their natural hair color, while Ray wasn't, because his hair gradually turned from black to red. Ray wondered whether he should be counted among the Dragon Knights. He didn't quite understand how true the elder's words were. Perhaps he misunderstood him. The night was cloudy. It was raining. Winford sincerely did not understand why the prophecy was revealed to the children right now. After all, they were still children. But the elder replied that some knowledge takes a certain amount of time to come to light, and that was necessary. Knight Winford did not argue, but merely bowed his head, acknowledging that he agreed with the elder's words. From that day on, Ray studied literature to learn more about the Dragon Knights. In the human world, dragons were now a fiction and a symbol of evil. Few believed in their existence. But there were those who believed that there was no shadow plague in the ancient world, mainly because dragons were considered the guardians of the earth. Most of the sources told the same story, just in different ways. But one book stood out. It had a very accurate description of the Dragon Knights. Moreover, from uniforms and combat skills right down to personal qualities. In addition, the existence of divine guidance was mentioned in this book. But since writing books related to God is taboo for people, he could not get more information, and he could not go beyond the borders of Avrion, because he was not yet a knight. He only knew about the existence of the god that he lived in the capital of the Kingdom of Allure, not far from Roland's academy. If it weren't for the ban, that he would have found out why he turned him into a human. The first year at the academy passed almost unnoticed, especially its end, because the boy became interested in studying the Dragon Knights, and the end of hard training was approaching. Tomorrow they were supposed to start their second year of training. Ray, of course, was not afraid of this. He slept peacefully at night, but that night his sleep was disturbed by someone's mumbling. He, recognizing Gary's voice, immediately jumped up to wake him up. It seemed that his friend was having some kind of nightmare, perhaps because of the fear of the second year. The guy woke up suddenly, almost jumping out of bed, and before his eyes was his friend, who was trying to bring him to his senses. He asked if everything was okay, since he had screamed in his sleep. But his friend replied that everything was fine, and that it was just a nightmare, turning away and wrapping himself up tighter. Ray went to bed. After all, he had to get up early tomorrow so as not to be late for the ceremony. And what could Gary have dreamed of that had driven him to such a state? The next day was clear. The sun was shining brightly, its rays warming the area. Ray looked in shock at the blonde man, who, falling asleep on the go, walked with circles under his eyes. On the way they saw Skavia. She, as always, was perfectly collected. Here she is, an excellent student. She asked how the guys were feeling and how they slept. She asked them what club they would join. But Ray didn't understand what they were talking about. It seemed like the guy didn't listen to anything at all during the lectures, so she had to explain everything to the guy. Every sophomore had to join a club of interest, where he would undergo additional training in the future. Ray decided to find out what the guys chose. Gary chose the fencing club, and Skavia decided to join the fencing club. Ray was shocked that his friend had already chosen everything and didn't tell him. He remembered that someone had advised him to join some club. It seemed it was a martial arts club, and where could he be at all? The boy walked, remembering that day. The old man then told him to join the martial arts club. Only he didn't understand what it was at all. Ray didn't want to join any club at all. He planned to go and just see what was there, so that if anything happened, he could just leave. Still, if it really got boring there, he could quietly leave and hunt monsters. That's what he thought. He was wrong. After gaining a new skill, Ray realized why the ball didn't sense him as a child. It had no value in terms of magic. There was hope that absorbing monster crystals would change everything. The battle with Sebastian attracted a lot of attention to his person. He could no longer move freely. And besides, he occupied too high a place in the ranking. Thinking about his own, Ray didn't notice how he came to the club. The place was by no means the best. It was surprising that anyone was working there at all. There was no one at the entrance. The guy went inside, trying to find at least someone. Entering the building, he saw someone sitting with his back to him. He said that he came to join the club. The answer was silence. The man was silent. Only his long gray hair, tied in a ponytail, was visible. Ray couldn't even smell him. From the outside, it seemed that he was dead. The guy decided to come up and find out what was going on. He was probably sleeping and needed to be woken up. But the man was not sleeping. He was waiting. As soon as Ray touched the old man, he instantly grabbed his hand, pulling him towards himself. The red-haired man didn't even have time to understand anything. The old man threw him over himself. Dropping him on his back onto the floor, the boy could only cough and howl from the pain that struck him. The old man immediately became furious, asking who dared to invade his domain, who decided to come to him. The second-year student immediately began shouting about the martial arts club. The screams reached the man's consciousness. He immediately recognized the young man who had helped him once. He himself had told him to come here. The man immediately smiled warmly, lifting the boy up. He was a good boy. Good. The elder was waiting for him. Ray began to get indignant, saying that it was not normal to attack everyone without caring what they needed at all. As soon as they sat down, the man said that he was glad to see him. The guy was supposed to be his first student in recent years. Ray was thinking about how to escape from these classes. The old man decided to start training from the very basics. With Chi, he began to talk about the power of Chi and how it works. It all came down to the fact that hand-to-hand combat was ineffective. Ray said that at this rate, hand-to-hand combat could simply fade into oblivion. But the old man convinced him otherwise, saying that no one understood the true nature of martial arts. Ray had little faith in the old man, but he said that when the boy mastered his skills, he would understand that the best weapon was his hands. Ray couldn't completely reject the old man's words because they sounded convincing. But he still had one question: who exactly attacked the old man that night? The elder said that these were people from the Dark Guild. He would have to study them in detail in the second year of training. The Dark Guild was aiming to destroy the kingdom. It was an extremist organization, run by a high-ranking person from Avrion, who was expelled from it for some reason. Ray understood that they definitely had something to do with his father's illness. They were connected to the Shadow Plague. It seemed that through them he could help his father. But these people were clearly dangerous. Some things could of course be kept secret. But the old man told why he was attacked. He was one of the 6 elders of the Avrion Academy. Despite his advanced age, the man was still confident in his muscles, and therefore ordered the guy to make a blow. It was necessary to assess his capabilities. The guy decided that he was aware of his capabilities, so he promised to try, getting into a stance and preparing to strike. It was an elder. He looked good and was in good physical shape. It seemed like he could let loose. Ray struck, but the old man didn't even flinch, much less move from his spot. Even a millimeter, the guy felt a slight pain in his hand. The old man was silent, and the guy was in shock. It felt like he had hit a steel plate. The man's abs were like stone. The old man was also amazed. He asked if he released Chi when he struck, but the guy said no, he didn't know how to do it anyway. The old man said that the boy had great potential. Mastering Chi should help him transform. Ray, of course, did not believe that the old man could be trusted, but he did not ask him. He said that they would soon start work. It was too late to leave. The old man, as he said, began the first lesson from the very basics. The man sat the guy down with his back to him and began to talk about Chi. The so-called Chi was the energy emanating from the body of every person. From birth, Chi was generated in a person with every breath. The stronger a person became, the more Chi he could use, and the key to mastering Chi was to start its circulation. The old man wanted to pour some of his Chi into the guy. Warmth spread throughout his body. The old man told him not to resist and to feel its flow with all his heart. Only after a few moments he heard a rumble. He did not know how to use an external source of power, and did not know what to do with this noise. Somewhere on the periphery he saw a notification from the system. But now it was more important to bring the old man to his senses. He shook him and said something to him in the hope that he would wake up. Ray understood that if his grandfather died, he would not be forgiven. But his heart was beating. It seemed that he could get off with a fright. Ray didn't understand what happened, but he remembered the system that opened the mana release skill. Most likely, the system absorbed the old man's mana not by his will, of course. Ray saw that the mana level had reached the maximum level. It seemed like the system itself had activated the passive skill. Within 5 minutes, Ray was shaking the old man like he was crazy. Not understanding why he hadn't come to yet even in his sleep, he didn't look like a good person. After only 10 minutes, he decided that the old man would not just die, so he decided not to waste time and to train himself. The dragon's patience lasted only 10 minutes, after which he turned on the dragon eye mode to see the flow of Chi. Ray decided to try to concentrate the Chi flows with his consciousness. He remembered the words of the elder that he heard a few minutes ago. Now it remained to focus and form, and also to fill the Dantian with Chi. A glow began to appear around. It seemed to be ready. Ray felt the flow of Chi as the old man said. The internal force began to move and the movement of his Chi began. Now he had to let it spread throughout his body. But it didn't happen. He opened his eyes, looking around. As soon as the QE started moving, it immediately disappeared. He tried again and again, but it didn't work. The old man was still lying unconscious. Ray tried again, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath, trying to concentrate the strength in his hands. However, the fire around, although it was flaring up, was still unbridled. The flow of Chi was extremely unstable. Ray didn't understand what was happening. He assumed it wasn't enough, so he decided to add more Chi next time. Gradually, the power of Chi grew. Its flow increased. Flames flared up around, but the guy still continued, increasing the amount. Gradually, the guy began to feel pain, and this pain increased. The flow was incredibly strong, and the Chi was still unstable. It was as if a flame of fire was raging around. The guy couldn't control it. He He couldn't stop. The blood in his body was boiling. At that moment, the old man woke up. It was very hot around. He began to look around to find the source of this heat. The man, seeing the second-year student, immediately jumped up, not understanding what this guy was doing. It seemed that he did not even have the slightest idea about chi. The old man ordered him not to move and touched him. It was necessary to somehow redirect this flow before it killed the guy. However, the guy couldn't stop. The flow became bigger and bigger. The man shouted at the guy, trying to reach the young man's consciousness. Finally, he was able to gather the chi, then redirect it away from the second-year student's body, and away from this very temple. The chi was incredibly powerful. A small house that stood at a relatively short distance from them simply exploded, breaking. The chi taken from the boy has amazing destructive power. The boy almost killed himself, pursuing goals that were incomprehensible to the old man. The guy, as soon as this chi left him, without understanding anything, fainted. It seems that the body's resources were used to the maximum. Some sounds began to reach the guy's consciousness. They gradually began to form into words. His eyes opened, and he saw a bright light and his friends. The boys were happy to see that their friend had woken up. He didn't immediately understand where he was, but they told him that he was in the hospital. They said that an elderly man brought it here in a hurry, and he even persuaded the dean to come and examine it personally. Kale praised him, saying that he was a good man to have met such an influential person, and Scavia told them to behave quietly. Kale's volume was simply astonishing. He immediately began to apologize, and then asked who the old man was. Scavia said that the old man was very worried about him. Only after Dean calmed him down, he left. During their conversation, Gary came to them. Ray was surprised by his arrival. It seemed like their entire room had moved here. Gary said that he had been knocked down during training, so he came here to rest. Ray walked back to the martial arts club thinking about the guy. Something was going on with the guy. He seemed to have some kind of place. However, the old man did not greet him joyfully at all. He immediately received a scolding from him for his behavior. Ray, stroking his bruised head, told the old man not to be angry, but the old man told him that he could have died if he had been alone that day. The red-haired man admitted that he was wrong, but the old man did not deny that he was surprised by how much chi he had released on his first day. The guy had talent, but he had to concentrate on controlling his chi. It had to be exactly the size of a fist, no more and no less. From now on, before he began further training, he had to start with the simple exercises the old man had shown him. After just 5 days, he could use chi to strengthen any part of his body, and chi became calmer and more manageable. Over the next few days, Ray began to learn to move chi to where it was needed at double the speed. It was a tough time, but Ray got through it. Time passed. They moved on to their second year. Today was their first expedition as second years. It was a one-day expedition. They stood near the southern gate of the Avrian Academy. The guys listened attentively to the instructions of the Knight Lancy. He explained that everything he said was necessary for their own safety, said some routine phrases and gave instructions. There were 3 hunting grounds near the academy that were safe enough for second-year students to hunt freely. Here they were to obtain crystals that could be used for trade, or to create new weapons. The boys were divided into 3 teams. They had to avoid the breeding grounds of monsters. Marta said that these very lands are a forest of insects. Dan didn't understand at first how exactly some insects could harm them. Ray was worried about Gary until they heard buzzing and screams from Dan and Kale. The monsters were flying towards them. Scavia ordered everyone to get ready, and advised them not to get nervous, so as not to get lost. Martha shouted for the boys to be on guard. The bugs might seem harmless and weak, but they always moved in flocks. Kale shouted that it was not an ordinary ladybug, as Scavia said, because it was clearly larger than usual. Martha covered Ian, shouting at him to be more careful and try to somehow see what was behind him, because he almost got bitten. Kale couldn't fight properly because he hated insects and spent more time screaming than killing them. Ray decided to use chi. Scavia was worried about him, but he managed to cope, tearing the monster apart. Kale praised his friend for learning to control chi. Ray laughed, deciding to look at the results of his friend's training, and Dan began to grumble. They should have used their weapons instead of wasting time on chatter. But before he could finish his thought, they heard a scream. The boys immediately turned to the source of the noise. Seeing Gary, who was bitten by a ladybug, the boys immediately ran to help their friend. Ian hit the monster with all his might, cutting off its head, and drops of Gary's blood fell on his clothes, staining his snow-white suit. The guys immediately began to help Gary get up. He should have been taken to the doctors, while Scavia could only provide first aid. The guy started apologizing for letting his friends down. He thought everything was fine. He just didn't get enough sleep. Ray looked at his friend worriedly. Usually he wouldn't even be touched by such a weak monster like this. Lately the guy wasn't like himself. It was worth finding out after the test what happened to him. But for now, Scavia, seeing that the wound was not deep, asked Ian to help remove the armor. Dan was watching his neighbor's actions. At this time, she was quite skilled in healing. They had learned this at the club. Kale, who was also there, said that chi not only strengthens the body, but also accelerates cell growth. Not only did Ray gain new skills, which was a call to try harder, Gary thanked the girl for her help. Dan, speaking to himself, hinted at the meeting, after which he had to tell Ray about it, who was hardly listening at all. 1/10 of the crystals mined in the hunting grounds must be taken as a fee if you mined less than 10 crystals. You will not give anything back. It was surprising that they set such a rule, but the academy had to make money somehow, so now they had to figure out how to deal with it. The red-haired man understood that the Squire Lancey was a tough nut to crack, and he should have hidden the crystals somewhere. It seemed the system should have helped. Gradually, the day was drawing to an end. The setting sun was giving its last rays before leaving. The guys came out to the training ground already tired. The day had worn them out. They passed by the knight, giving him the crystals. But Lancey didn't miss the opportunity to humiliate Ray, who came out last and with only 5 small crystals. But the guy just shrugged his shoulders in response. Lancey decided that the guy was fooling him, so he ordered the equipment to be removed, but the search yielded nothing. Ray was absolutely clean. The Squire did not believe him. Lancey immediately said that if he tried to hide something, he would find out about it, and the bastard would get it. But Ray was not afraid. He understood that he would not do anything. The knight's threats were also another empty sound. He understood that he was doing everything out of personal hostility. Monk asked how he managed to do this, but Ray brushed it off, saying that it was a secret. He realized that the monster's crystals, after being transferred to the system, become ordinary stones. These stones become more useless. After killing a magical beast, the monster's crystal can enter the system directly. Others dig into the remains of the beast. In order to divert suspicion from himself, Ray had to control the system so that it did not directly absorb the crystals, since it was impossible to return them from there. To go to the virtual store, it was necessary to leave a few crystals. Ray expected that the system would be ineffective for weapons that had already been created. However, it turned out that she began to absorb the crystals directly. He should be more careful in the future so as not to get caught. He understood that if Delbert or Lancey found out about this, no one would let him live in peace. The guy, thinking about his own, noticed that his friend was not walking next to him and began to look around. Gary stood motionless. Ray decided that he had lost something, but he did not answer him. He had to go up to find out what exactly was wrong with the guy. The blonde muttered something. It was difficult to make out everything. Only the words about the red gate were clear. He wanted to open some red gate. Ray tried to understand what his friend was talking about, but he kept whispering until he started crying, falling to his knees and starting to scream. Gary asked to stop, clutching his head as if in a fit. Ray didn't know what to do. He couldn't calm him down. At this time, the rest of the guys began to notice that Ray and Gary were missing, although they themselves had recently walked with them. Monk told the others to go ahead. He decided to look for them. Maybe they were just talking about something of their own, but it was worth checking. Scavia decided to stop her friend, but she didn't have time. The guy jumped up from his seat, saying that everything would be fine and he would sort everything out himself. Arriving at the place, he saw Gary screaming. He didn't understand what was happening to his friend until Ray told him. He seemed to be crazy. He kept talking about the red gate. Monk assumed that he was talking about the prison. Gary kept saying that he needed to go and find that red gate. He needed to open it. Ray's consciousness took him to a variety of worlds. Now he didn't understand where he was. Didn't understand if it was real, but he heard someone's voice. This voice told him that he was waiting for him, that he was finally here, that the guy needed to find him so that he would tell him a secret. A luminary appeared before his eyes. He was not sure if it was the sun, but the luminary told him that it would reveal all the secrets of the world to him. He didn't understand what secrets were being talked about. The guy was even standing without socks, if he was standing at all, because he felt nothing underneath him. In an instant, the light disappeared behind the red gate. The door slammed shut, leaving Ray alone with unanswered questions. Ray screamed in his sleep until he woke up with the feeling of falling, realizing it was all a dream, an all too realistic dream. The guy stood up, wanting to get out of bed. His friend at this time was muttering something again about the red gates, the same ones he had just dreamed about. The guy couldn't sleep, so it was decided to think about all this. He remembered that very day when they left the hunting grounds. Gary, after his hysteria, said that he did not remember what he dreamed. He said that it all started after he walked past them one day, holding their gaze. From that very day on, he began to have nightmares every day. which he could not remember when he woke up. He only remembered the horror he felt when he woke up. It seemed to him that there was someone waiting for him behind the gate. This feeling was getting stronger and stronger. He wanted to go and check, but Monk was shaking his head. The dark-haired man thought that their friend had gone crazy. He couldn't get into prison, he could be expelled, but the blonde couldn't do otherwise. This voice was gradually killing him. Ray himself began to feel something similar, so he said that they couldn't get caught. Monk acted as their voice of reason, reminding them that they could die. Ray just shrugged at his words. If they use their skills, then they have nothing to fear. Monk could not worry. The main thing was to understand whether he would go with them. The blonde tried to persuade Ray not to anger their friend. It was enough for him that the red-haired man wanted to go with him and help. It was just that Monk was more invisible than they were. After a minute of thought and internal struggle, he finally agreed, said that he would go. He was flattered by the red-haired man's words. He wanted to help his friends. They were helping him. Monk said that he would repay them for the previous duel. Ray smiled contentedly at his small victory. Everything was going well so far. The plan was ready. They were waiting for the right day to get together. He couldn't understand what exactly drew Gary there. Was it really true that all the secrets of the world were kept there? The next day, late in the evening, the guys had to gather near the Avrian prison. Night was falling. It was time for them to meet. The soldiers stood and waited for the guard to change so they could go about their business. They didn't want to stand near such a place. While the knights were doing their job, unsuspectingly, Gary, Ray, and Monk were already discussing the whole plan among themselves so as not to miss anything. Monk asked if they were sure they wouldn't notice the guy because the guards looked pretty impressive. But Gary reassured him, saying that the Knights of the Black Belt wouldn't stay overnight. Every Tuesday from 10 to 11 o'clock at night, the Black Belts were replaced by white ones. This was a chance. Gary had been preparing for a long time. Ray noticed this too. It seems they had some kind of common meeting. Since they were changing, the red-haired one activated the dragon's eye to see what was inside the prison. He saw some chambers, passages, saw a long staircase leading deep down. There was only pitch darkness down there. Even his gaze could not see anything. Ray assumed that there really was something very, very scary there. And besides, the prison was built underground, so there must have been something dangerous there. This was alarming, but all that was left was to wait for the right time. It was time for the changing of the guard, and the guys even managed to take a little nap. Now the most important thing was beginning. They needed to somehow make some noise to attract the attention of the men and distract the knights. They went off somewhere, thinking that it was just their imagination. It was time to hurry. The elders were waiting. Everything was going according to plan. It was time for the guys to go out. However, as soon as they took a step towards the red treasured gate, Gary was grabbed by the arm to stop both of them and understand what they were about to do. The guys turned around, freezing. Jasmine was standing in front of them. It was unclear what she was doing there, how she even found out. Jasmine was a third-year black belt student and said she was returning from training and saw them sneaking off somewhere. The guys tried to justify themselves somehow, but she immediately asked if they would be sneaking into Avrian's prison. Gary tried to come up with something on the go. At this time, some barrels fell on the opposite side. There was a noise, and Monk began to do his part. Ray watched everything carefully while Gary distracted the third year. The guards began to take apart the barrels to stack them and tie them properly. It was time for them to leave. Jasmine, hearing that they had dragged someone else in, was furious, starting to scold them, puffing and cursing, as if they didn't understand what kind of place this was. It was against school rules. Gary couldn't do anything to stop her. Ray came to the rescue. They couldn't leave her there. She thought that the red-haired man was trying to make her shut up, but she didn't notice how the blonde man came up from behind at that moment, knocking her out. She was extremely talkative, but the question now was whether it was worth leaving her here, because here she could tell everything, and there she could get them into trouble. It was decided to take her inside. After all, if she blabs, then everything will be bad. They went to the door. Monk at this time was already opening the lock. Gary told him to work faster because the guards would either return sooner or simply spot them, but the dark-haired man asked him not to rush him. A second later, the lock was open. The guys carefully climbed inside, while the guards were fiddling with the barrels, trying to reassemble them and tie them up again. The doors of the Avrian prison closed, hiding 4 students from prying eyes. One of them had been watched by a black belt knight all this time. The man understood that his object himself helped him get rid of him. He himself went to his death. Lord Gibby should have been pleased, but the guys, having entered inside, did not calm down, but became wary. They finally got inside. There were no windows, but the guys took the lighting stone. Now it was time to look around, which is what Monk did. though he quickly finished when he saw the girl in Ray's arms. They managed to drag her here. The girl gradually began to come to her senses. Monk immediately went to her to help her get up and ask how she was. They all knew her. The girl, when she fully came to her senses and realized that she had been knocked out, began to argue with the blonde for acting so disrespectfully, even though she was older. She began to threaten to rat out the guy in full. But Ray immediately said that she was inside with them, and if anything happened, she would also be expelled. The guys, of course, tried to calm the girl down, and tried to calm Ray down so that he wouldn't threaten. But in general, after the red-haired man's words, everyone calmed down. Jasmine was upset by the guy's behavior. But she couldn't do anything. The guys decided to move on. It was worth looking around and moving on. The girl said that she was not interested. She was curious, but reason still won. They did not argue with her, hoping that she would not rat them out later. She said that she would lead them, because the eldest had to watch over them. So she carried the luminous stone in her hands, while the boys walked silently behind her. The guys, going down, examined the walls. There were cells everywhere and all over. They were closed, but there was no one inside. The prison was as if empty. Monk was the first to notice, saying that this shouldn't be happening. None of the guys had heard of prisoners being transferred here. It was annoying. What was the point of such a prison if there were no prisoners in it? Jasmine's attention was drawn to her. She thought that this was not why they came here. She told them about the rumors that were going around the academy. It was believed that this place was called a prison to hide what Avrian did not want to show. According to legend, there were not real prisoners sitting here, but she was told that when the truth came out, everyone would be shocked. Ray noticed that no one knew what was really going on here. He himself thought about his dream, hoping that the secrets hidden here would give him an answer to the question. However, Jasmine said that it was all a legend, hoping that she could scare them at least a little. There were only 3 riders and the 6th elder inside. At some point during the descent, they felt a foul smell that made them hold their noses. This fume simply made the boys' eyes water. No one understood where it came from. But Ray noticed the wind. It was strange that it could blow here. Some noise was coming from below. Monk said that they should go back. The stench was strong. He could no longer breathe. Jasmine supported him. It seemed that she herself was scared. But Gary refused, said that he had to find out what exactly was in this place. He had to find out what he had been dreaming about all this time. The guys reached the very end. The stairs were overcome. It seemed they had reached their goal. A large iron door appeared in front of them. Another one. The boys stood in front of the door, trying to at least roughly understand what its dimensions were against the backdrop of this massive sheet of iron. They were like little ants. The door seemed very old. It was not clear whether it was made of simple iron, and the power of the luminous stone was not enough to illuminate it all. Gary decided not to hesitate. As if the noose around his neck was getting tighter and tighter, he wanted to open it as soon as possible. The guy decided to immediately use the power of chi. But it was difficult. She barely moved a millimeter. There was not enough ki. Ray activated the dragon's eye, starting to examine everything. The guys were trying to open the door at this time. Ray understood that the place was enchanted with high-level magic or a heavenly shield was placed on it, so he could not see anything. The boys writhed, trying to open the door. It was practically impossible. It was locked tightly. Monk still offered them to stop everything and go back, but Gary persisted, saying that he would not come back, and asked the red-haired man to help him. He believed him very much. Ray approached the door. The system immediately gave him a choice whether to open the door or not. After his choice, the gears started spinning. The door began to open. The guys couldn't understand how exactly he did it. He didn't understand either. The gear moved inward with a characteristic sound. The magic crystal illuminated very poorly. They could only see a small part of what was before their eyes, so it was almost impossible to see what was inside. But they still stepped into the darkness. Fear of the unknown overcame the group with every step, but they stubbornly moved forward. Gary led them, and they could not abandon him. On the way, Gary stepped on something that crunched loudly. Jasmine immediately pressed herself against the red-haired man out of fear. Monk tensed up, but Gary calmed them down, saying that it was he who stepped on something. True, he stepped on it, as it turned out, after he shone the light a little forward, onto the remains of the skeleton of some huge animal. Perhaps it was some kind of animal. The guys started to think who it was. Monk decided that it was a dragon, but Ray immediately snorted, saying that dragons don't just die, they touched a nerve. They gradually began to approach the goal. It was very spacious around, which was extremely strange, and at the same time they did not see any prisoners during the entire time they were here. At the end of the path, some cages appeared before them, but they were empty. Some of them had broken bars, and they could not see far. There were an infinite number of cages. Monk was the first to notice the bars, saying that someone might have escaped. It was time for them to return. Even Ray thought they had gone too far. But Gary didn't listen to anything, not just about the underground monster fights, not about the escaped monsters, not about the changing of the guard. No one understood him. And the guy could no longer and did not want to experience this horror. Waking up at night to get to the truth, they needed to go a little further. He needed to. Gary stubbornly walked forward, climbing into one of the cages. Ray ran after him to stop him. Who knew what those cages could hide inside? Gary said he heard the voice calling him again. It was in one of the cells. He was looking for him. The guy seemed to be delirious. A green fog began to appear around. The boys covered themselves from it, trying not to breathe it in, until they saw Gary flying away, who was thrown with all his might into the wall. Ray immediately removed his elbow from his nose and pulled out his sword. The aura around him thickened, became heavy, oppressive. It seemed that things were bad. In the cage from which Gary had just flown out, a green fog began to thicken, drawing the outline of some creature. The boys froze in fear. The creature moved loudly and heavily, shifting its paws. As Ray later noticed, it was waiting for them. As soon as he emerged from the thick fog and appeared before the boys, they recognized him. He was the lost cow god. And it seemed he was strong. The creature was extremely strong. Green smoke was billowing around, enveloping the lungs. The roar was felt to be heard throughout the entire prison. With every step the monster took, the ground shook under the feet of the young knights. They fell, unable to hold on. It seemed it was hard. The first one who caught the monster's eye was third-year student Jasmine. Her eyes lit up red. Apparently the bull saw his red rag. The monster immediately grabbed the girl, squeezing her in its paw, but Monk came to her aid, plunging his blades into the beast's paw. She fell down, unable to even move. Monk told her to get out, but her legs went numb from fear. The guy slid along the giant's body, but couldn't catch him, while the dark-haired man himself left more and more wounds on the monster's body. Monk jumped down to the girl to help. They couldn't leave her there. They had to hide her. But before they could reach the shelter, a new roar was heard. The sound wave was so strong that it blew them forward, he growled, gathering the charge to fire at Monk and Jasmine. The impact was so strong that the stones in this den fell from above, breaking against each other. The shockwave caused Gary's unconscious body to jump, hitting the same rocks. Surprisingly, the sword did not slip out of the guy's hands. He immediately woke up, came to his senses, and began to look around to understand where he was and what was happening. At first, he didn't recognize the monster that Ray was now fighting. But then he realized that he had lured them here himself, even if it wasn't of his own free will. Ray tried to fight back against the lost cow god. It was very difficult. He was incredibly strong. But fortunately, Noah came to his aid. Jasmine and Monk didn't understand why this wolf was helping them. But Ray said not to be afraid because he was with them. There was no time to tell. He gave orders to his beast to take the girl to a safer place. He told Monk to hold his breath, and then, when he grabbed him, to kill him with his knives. Monk didn't understand how the guy would do it. It was impossible. But he asked to trust him. In a second, he began to blaze with golden flames, releasing chi. Monk couldn't believe his friend was so strong. He seemed to be just amazing. He wished him luck as he prepared. Ray was ready to attack him and weaken him in order to grab him. But the monster simply attacked. Knocking the weapon out of his hands, he had to rely on chi and his own strength. The red-haired man realized how much he had underestimated the lost cow god, because it was a real monster. Ray wouldn't let the monster escape. It had to die, he shouted to Monk, who jumped on him from behind to finish it off. But he couldn't stick the knives into the monster. Now they could go to their forefathers. Not him, the skin was hard as steel. He was absolutely impenetrable. But Monk realized this too late, and Gary, who had already recovered from his unconscious state, came to their aid. But Gary's sword broke from just one contact with the monster's skin. They couldn't believe it. Right now, their friend was literally on the verge of death. Ray stood with his back pressed against the stone wall. His body was using up its resources and was being depleted. The main goal was survival. Chi was saving him. However, not everything was as bad as he thought. The system reminded him about the passive activation of the skill. He immediately activated the skill. At that moment, mana began to accumulate, which was drawn out of the body of the lost cow god. A glow came from the monster. Life was leaving it. At some point, the monster simply jumped away from the guy. Feeling that he was losing strength, a terrible roar was heard throughout the cave. Mana was replenished. Now he could strike back for the sword that was once taken away. He remembered the old man's lessons, concentrating his chi. And then you had to put it into your attack. The guy was on fire. It seemed like he was truly a fire dragon. The blow seriously wounded the lost cow god. The boy succeeded. The monster was knocked down, although not completely defeated. He was happy, smiling, realizing that the old man's special training really had a big advantage. It helped. However, not everything was so smooth. Gary, who was watching from the outside, saw that Ray was in serious danger. The guy dodged too late, because he was too carried away by his small victory, followed by a small defeat. The mutant struck back. The guy fell on the rocks, hitting himself. He still couldn't control his body properly. After so many years, he still hadn't succeeded. Apart from the numbness caused by the monster's electric shock, it was because he released too much mana at once that my body couldn't adjust too quickly. The body was still not adapted. It was not resilient enough. But there was a more serious problem. If they did nothing, they would simply be killed. The guy was already preparing for death, until he saw something behind the monster. His face immediately expressed some surprise. He even forgot about the monster ready to kill him. There was a shadow on the rock that said that they, guys, had gotten into trouble with an enemy beyond their strength. Mr. K finished smoking another cigarette, blowing acrid white smoke into the air. And after taking a drag, he ordered the children to get out of the monster's sight. The boys screamed with happiness. Glad that they would not die in this cave, Mr. K was now the center of the universe for them. Mr. K dealt blow after blow, weakening and wounding the monster. The man managing to smoke a cigarette in the process without getting confused in his movements. Another blow landed right on the jaw of the lost cow god, knocking him off his feet, and the green fog began to thicken around him again. Because of him, the knight did not notice when the monster tried to grab him. But he was already weakened, so the knight was able to get out of the huge paw, cutting off the fingers of the monster. The monster roared in pain and rage. It seemed that one of the most important parts of its front limb had been removed. The monster ran towards the knight in the hope of catching him, but did not even notice how he appeared behind his back in a second. One swing of the sword, and the cow god was defeated. At this time, Monk helped Gary up and out. It seemed the problem was finally solved. They did it. At this time, Ray ordered Noah, who was hiding, to return. His wolf had helped him a lot today. But before he could leave, the system gave him a notification. A new ability was unlocked. He could now absorb new elements. Mr. K was already approaching them with Jasmine in his arms. He said that due to the small amount of magic power, he was able to defeat the monster. Now all that was left was to leave here without any problems. They walked away in silence until Mr. K asked them if they had anything to say to him. But instead of apologizing, they only asked what would happen to them. Mr. K, like a real mentor, began to scare them, saying that expelling them would be a very mild punishment. However, later he calmed them down. He honestly didn't understand how they managed to survive the guys, of course. Made excuses and asked for forgiveness for climbing in here. So K immediately calmed them down. He had no desire to exclude his boys for doing the almost impossible. Standing up to a king-level monster, their eyes immediately lit up. K told them that if they kept this night a secret, he would pretend that he hadn't seen them, and then asked how they opened the door. Well, they said that's how it happened. K thought it was strange, but he knew that the children couldn't have opened it. But from behind the closing door came a voice telling Ray that he would be waiting for him again. That night at the Academy Hospital, the doctor on duty again scolded Mr. K for his excessive training, saying that he had put 4 students on beds at once. At this time, the boys lay and discussed whether Sir K had stood up for them, judging by the words from behind the curtains. All the blame fell on his shoulders. Ray was thinking about their mentor. He was extremely frightening in anger, flying in these thoughts. He remembered his friend and decided to ask why he went on, although he was asked to stop. He began to apologize, saying that he himself could not explain it. He felt that he needed to go there. Something was pushing him. He could not control either his body or his mind. Gary didn't know why at all, but Monk did, and he immediately joined in their conversation, showing them the book, and here was the answer to Gary and Ray's questions. He said that this book was written about the lost cow god, who, in addition to the magic of thunder and lightning, had another ability. This power was called the mental labyrinth. The guys began to listen attentively, and Monk began to tell them a legend from the very book that was in his hands. According to this legend, the queen of one state and a white bull once gave birth to a monster with a bull's head, which was to be sacrificed to the gods. Having learned about the creature born by the queen, the king became furious and ordered a huge labyrinth to be built on an uninhabited island at the very edge of the world. The born Minotaur was trapped in a labyrinth for life, and even after death his soul could not find peace. The Minotaur possessed truly divine power as he grew. In order to escape from captivity, he acquired the ability to emit an aura that influenced the hearts of people. Bewitched people lost control of their minds. Their actions were dictated by their strongest emotions. Ray listened attentively. thinking that this was nonsense. What kind of legend was this? How could a man and a bull have a child? But Gary showed compassion for the creature. He was curious about what happened next, but Monk replied that it wasn't written in the book. Most likely he was able to escape. And Gary understood the reason for his dreams. The red-haired man couldn't understand if the Minotaur was the cause of Gary's dreams, then whose voice he heard in his dream. But he didn't have to think for long. He was distracted by the knight who entered. Mr. K came in to check on the boys and say that everything is fine. According to the doctor, everything is fine. Everything healed on them like on dogs. In a couple of days they will return to work. The guys were worried that the coach was still swearing, and Ray called him to ask him something. Well, he was interested. He assumed that they were worried about his injury. He immediately began to calm them down, saying that he only had a couple of broken ribs. For him it was something like a routine. But Ray stopped him, starting to talk about the royal stone, whether it remained and whether they would get a part of it, since they also took part in this battle. But the man then shouted at them, telling them not to even think about him. This was payment for his efforts. After all, he saved them. And whose fault was it that he suffered like this? Ray agreed, deciding not to argue. Sir K decided to let them rest, telling them to go for a full-body examination tomorrow. But the Red One had one more question. He wondered how the man knew that they had broken into the prison, since no one knew about their plan except the three of them. Even Jasmine couldn't tell anyone. She was always in their sight and was with them. He noted that his children were incredibly curious. They wanted to know everything. One of the hidden ones told him about this. Ray realized that they had been followed all this time. Monk remembered that he had heard about it. They said that the academy assigned such people to the students. They blended in with the crowd to protect students from trouble. Gary noted that, to put it simply, they simply reported on the most problematic ones. Mr. K said that was all, because they only needed to know this information, so they should leave him alone and take care of their own pressing problems. The red-haired man realized that the secrets of the Avrian Academy were much simpler than they seemed at first glance, although he did not understand or know everything. However, he decided to spend time studying the system. He obtained an ability after that battle with the lost cow god. It was the ability to absorb elements. This ability allowed one to attract the enemy's magical abilities and strengthen one's spells. Now it was of almost no use. But there was one thing. He didn't know what would happen in the future, which meant that she could be useful to him. He looked at the sleeping guys, judging by the fact that Sir K didn't ask about anything. They didn't tell him. Most likely, they themselves did not understand what had happened. Gary slept peacefully, apparently. The nightmares no longer disturbed him. It was all the influence of the monster. Ray spent some time in the hospital recovering from that day, and then returned to training, starting to practice chi. The man who was watching him train praised him, saying that the technique he had chosen was quite good and suitable for him. But Ray had a slightly different opinion. He believed that in this situation the weapon was used only for defense, and his hands were not very strong. The man did not argue with that. He saw that the young man was right. Something had to be thought of. An interesting idea came to his mind. He had something for the boy. He sat in front of the box, looking for one thing that was supposed to help the red-haired man. But the search was taking too long. Ray himself suggested forgetting about it. The guy sincerely did not understand what good could be hidden in such a place that the old man was so fixated on it, he was distracted from his thoughts by the man's scream. He found what he had been looking for so long. These were some large metal gloves that were called dragon fists. The name confused the guy. The size of these gloves was clearly larger than Ray needed. He did not understand whether they were so good that the old man spent so much time looking for them. But he reassured him, saying that they changed their size to suit the owner's dimensions. He was extremely interested in who the previous owner was. But what interested him most was how they fit into a small closet in such a large size. Ray noticed that the gloves were not simple. They were made of monster crystals. These were mid-level crystals. Dragon horns, if the crystals were stronger. The gloves would be more powerful. The old man wanted to give him a weapon of a higher level. But he thought that it might not be entirely fair to the other participants. Ray didn't really understand what it was about right away. The old man had to enlighten him. All second-year students and above were required to participate in the Academy's annual tournament. A one-on-one battle where the top 5 were chosen. These 5 students will have to represent the Academy and compete against the strongest from other countries around the world in the Tournament of Nations. The old man lent him gloves so that he could win and then get into the top 10 of the tournament. The old man was fired up by this, saying that he would give them to him for a good place in the ranking. He advised the boy to start looking for something that could provide him with protection. For example, a breastplate or a shield. They would definitely be useful to him in battle. he already had a weapon. He thought about his equipment for a long time, and eventually went to some shop to have a shield made for him. It seemed as if his screams were heard outside the market. The man said that if he was not happy with the price, he should go somewhere else where it would not be so expensive. But Ray stood his ground because last time, he was told a different price. To which the man replied that the price of protective gear made from mid-level monster crystals was child's play. 10 small crystals, or 1,000 yuan. The extra 10 small crystals he had to pay were the price for his silence. He had absolutely no interest in where he got them from. Ray understood that if something happened, they wouldn't be able to dig through and catch him when he was hiding the crystals. But the extra noise could attract unnecessary attention. And unnecessary attention in turn could lead to the fact that he would no longer be able to hunt alone. He had to give him the crystals so that he would do everything. The man took the payment with satisfaction, and smiling at the red-haired man, said that everything would be done at the highest level, and the guy would be pleased with their family's work. Ray watched the man get to work. Slippery human nature was present in all areas of human life, he thought. True. While he was thinking, he didn't notice that Skavia, who had seen him, started walking towards him as soon as she came closer. She began greeting him, saying that she was glad to see him. He was surprised to meet her. Asking why she came and whether she was there for new uniform, she nodded, agreeing. The guy was right. He immediately came closer to her, starting to whisper to her that it was worth changing the store. Because its owner was not the most honest businessman, she decided to figure it out. The girl immediately went to the bench, banging her palms on the wood and shouting for the owner to come to her. The voice answered her that he would be right there. The man, recognizing her, addressed her as Miss Hart, offering to go inside. But she said that there was no need for that, and that she had come there on an errand. She was interested in the price of making a mid-level monster crystal armor for her friend. Ray looked on, not understanding why she was called that. Her family was famous, it seemed. She, having quarreled with the man, went back, told Ray that she had returned the excess, giving the crystals back. He only thanked her. The difference in attitude towards people surprised him. He recalled Sebastian's words about the children of a peasant and a knight. The blonde was disgusting to him, but his words truthfully reflected the situation in the human world. Ray decided he should thank Skavia for helping him. He supposed she might not have needed it, but that was the way he was raised. The guy pulled his hand out of his pocket, reaching out to her and, opening his palm, handed her the middle crystal of Wally the bear. The girl immediately recognized it, saying that she could not take it. She couldn't. It was considered more valuable than 10 small monster crystals. But Ray convinced her to take it, saying that there was no point in him keeping the crystal, and Skavia might need it. Ray said he would go and look for something else, and as he left, he waved goodbye to her. The girl squeezed the crystal in her palms, blushing. Ray examined the breastplate made by the master. He was unusually polite, even apologized, all because of Skavia's help. But Ray didn't even listen to him, thinking about his own. He had a good command of chi, and the breastplate and gloves the old man had given him could serve him well. He couldn't wait for the next hunt. While Ray was looking forward to hunting a higher-level monster, Mr. Gibby was thinking about how to defeat the boy who came out of the dungeon alive. The knight reported that according to the information, the spy had informed Mr. K, and he had already rescued the children from the Avrian prison. The elder didn't even imagine that this ancient system worked at all. The knight noted that with 3 horsemen and K, it wouldn't be so easy to get rid of the guy. So he suggested using Cheese Delbert, who also desperately wanted to get rid of the red-haired man after the situation with his son. However, the elder stopped him. It was always possible to come to him, but he was one of the 3 horsemen. It was necessary to make sure of his loyalty. Gibby said to leave the night, because they could easily manipulate the guy without Delbert's participation. But his guild would notice his special merits and reward him with a new position. The man nodded at the elder's words and said that he would now pass on the order to his subordinates. But Gibby added that if he could not cope, then he should not come to him. Late at night, in the foothills of the hunting grounds, the boys gathered for another hunt. Gary said that they should all try to save up money for new equipment. The guys, as they walked, thanked Ray for what he did, but he didn't even understand what they were talking about. Even Dan said that the guys all appreciated him very much. Martha immediately left, saying that she didn't want to draw attention to herself. And Ray looked at Skavia, assuming that she had a hand in this. The girl said that she exchanged Wally the bear's crystal for gold, and gave it to the guys on behalf of the guy. But she didn't take it, because she already had a pretty good shield. The girl was worried that the guy was upset that she had not discussed it with him. But he, on the contrary, was happy, even proud of the girl to some extent. He took her by the shoulders, saying that she could make a very good leader in the future. She blushed from the compliments, but after she started hitting him, Not understanding why he suddenly became so serious, everyone began to look at them. A little later, Gary, walking with Ray, asked if it was true that nothing had happened between him and Scavia, and he didn't understand what they were talking about. He asked what exactly the guy meant. Gary became serious, looking around the grounds as they walked. He just sighed, rolling his eyes, and told him to forget about it. In his opinion, the guy had nothing but sawdust in his head. But he asked him to promise him something, so that he wouldn't do the same to Amy when he met her again. And Ray had no idea what they were talking about until Dan shouted for everyone to get ready. Giant dragonflies were flying towards them. Ray turned on the dragon's eye to see the level of the monster. It was low level. They had nothing to fear. The boys noticed that it was becoming easier for them to fight monsters, and their fighting skills were noticeably better than before. Dan believed that he would receive a white belt. Monk didn't lag behind, fighting the monsters with all his might. His small knives deftly cutting down the monsters, his stealth skills pumped up to the limit. Ray looked around, analyzing. He shouted for everyone to get ready and not to relax. There was supposed to be a second wave. He turned out to be right. After the dragonflies, Hercules beetles began to arrive. These were already mid-level monsters, and the task's feasibility gradually decreased. Dan was surprised, noticed that even a mid-level monster was just some kind of bug. A spear was deftly spinning in his hands. He jumped towards him, piercing his belly. The monster was defeated and fell to the ground with a crash. Dan was shocked to realize how hard the monster's shell was, but it was too early to panic. The bugs were getting closer and closer. The guys were cornered. The monsters surrounded them. There was nowhere to retreat. They had to accept the fight. Gary tried to cut off the monster's limb, but eventually discovered that the shell was extremely hard. Marta said that she barely managed to shoot through the monster's armor, and Scavia attacked them with all her might, not letting them get close to her and Marta. However, there were a lot of monsters. They were already able to encircle Ian, Monk, and Dan, who were trying to fight them off. However, not far from the guys, a scream of a monster was heard. It was thrown into the air by the blow. Dan himself was the first to notice this, followed by the others. It was Ray who used chi to attract the attention of the bugs and help his friends, who immediately began to move towards the light. He burned them out. The shell, although hard, could not withstand the power of chi. The guys looked at the guy with admiration, noticing his new weapon. Monk said that the weapon was lent to him by the master of the martial arts club that Ray joined. Dan realized that he had made a mistake in choosing a club based on his interests. Ray was thinking about how to behave so as not to arouse suspicion among his friends. He turned to them, shouting for them to finally help him. There was no time to rest. Marta began shooting the monsters with a bow. Although she understood that it would be difficult to hit them, she did not have enough chi to be able to pierce the shell. But Scavia came to her aid, whose shield, made from high-level beast crystals, could hurt monsters quite well if used as a weapon. Monk attacked the monster from behind with his knives, calling for Dan to help him. Dan ran to help his friend. His sword was somewhat stronger than the black-haired man's knives, so his blows did more damage. They tried to cut off the monster's limbs one by one to immobilize it. This was the most reasonable way. Ian had a good command of his strength. They dealt with the last one well after midnight. It was very difficult, all because of the shells of these very monsters. Dan understood that these were mid-level monsters, and the same crystals definitely dropped from them, and Monk immediately began looking for them with him. The boys had the feeling that they were rich, but Ray didn't take the crystals. He had two, so he decided to leave the others for the boys. But Ray understood that the appearance of so many monsters, huddled in groups, looked like someone's plan. He was distracted by the birds that suddenly flew out. Something was wrong. He activated the dragon eye mode and saw the fire. He immediately shouted to the guys that the flame was moving towards them. They should get out immediately. Martha confirmed his words, and Gary, falling to the ground and listening, said that someone was coming towards them. Dan did not understand what they were waiting for, but it was too late. The flames were approaching the boys from all sides. Martha told Scavia to use the disaster gem and give a signal, but she couldn't call the knights for help. It didn't work. Ray saw the people and realized that everything was set up. The stone didn't break for no reason. People they didn't understand were walking towards them. With different weapons in their hands and masks on their faces, they couldn't identify them. Monk assumed that these people had come to save them, but Ray said he was wrong, and Gary asked what exactly they wanted from them. However, there was no answer. The one in the middle waved 2 fingers, and the 2 on the outside rushed towards the children, attacking. Monk was the first to get hit, and Gary immediately began to protect him, fighting off the man in the mask. Ray activated his dragon eye mode to look at them. He needed to understand who they were dealing with, but before he could see anything, one of the masks immediately attacked him, and he had to start defending himself. Ray didn't understand who these people were and why they attacked them. The gloves helped to fight off the weapon of one of the people in red. He noticed that the sword of one of them was not ordinary. It had some kind of power, so it was more difficult to resist than the others. Ray tried to fight back, pushing the man away. His gloves helped him. Don't let him touch him. It was time to get his weapon out. At this time, the guys ran to the monk to help. Dan began to bring his best friend to his senses, but he began to say that everything was fine, albeit with difficulty. Ian said he would go and help the guys. Overall, Monk didn't have any serious injuries, but a wall of fire suddenly appeared in front of him. Ray turned back towards the screams. He heard Ian calling out to him, realizing that they were deliberately trying to separate them. But only for what purpose did they need to do that? He knew they needed him and Gary, or maybe just him. Gary was already caught in the crossfire. Ray was left fighting 1 against 2. He told the boys to call the knights for help. This was the only way they could save themselves. Dan was the first to agree with him and began to drag Monk, leading his friends away for help. Ian told them to hold on, and then the guys split up. But Ray himself no longer heard his friend. He was looking at the enemy. The red-haired man understood that the enemy was fast, but not fast enough to defeat him. But while he was protected like this, it was impossible to mortally wound him. Gary at this time tried to detain the second. The other 2 at that moment began to attack Ray with a sword and nunchucks. The man with the sword attacked first, and Ray realized that he almost always used the same attack. 1 blow, and he grabbed the nunchucks of the second mask. The man with the nunchucks was really bothering him. He saw that the main one was the man with the sword. Ray understood that no matter how much he fought, the second one always came to his aid, preventing him from dealing with the enemy. They worked very well as a team. It was not so easy for one red-haired man to cope. Luckily, the guy's chest armor was able to save him from a fatal injury when he was hit by a nunchuck, just as he was starting to think of a plan. He saw that his friend needed help. He did not interfere, absorbed 5 crystals of a small monster. The process of evolution began. The guy became a knight, a dragon. He called Noel. Now was the time. His wolf evolved into a horned wolf, and immediately a large blue-violet creature with glowing eyes appeared. One told the other that intelligence had not reported anything to them about the guy having magical abilities, but the partner said that it did not affect anything. The mission doesn't change, and they should continue doing their job. Noel growled loudly, starting to rush towards the masked men. Ray began to attack, and the enemy decided to use the same technique. Ray decided to finally break the enemy's weapon. One of them, the one with the nunchucks, noticed that the boy was extremely strong for his age, and he gave the order to his wolf to attack. One of them noticed that the guy was trying to cut him off from his comrades, just as they had tried to cut him off recently. But they tried to stick together, believing that they understood his plans, and now he could not defeat them. Ray gave the order to Noel to take out the guy with the knives, and he himself decided to deal with the guy with the sword. His wolf attacked one, and he himself began to attack the man with an unusual sword. His wolf, with a loud, menacing roar, pounced on the masked man, not allowing him to get close to his master. The man immediately tried to remove the animal. He had put hundreds of them down, but he didn't take into account that it was a horned wolf, whose owner was a dragon knight. And the dragon knight at that moment was trying to overcome that very magic sword, which was a splinter. It needed to be disarmed. He noticed that after he, chained, approached him, the enemy stopped letting him approach him and did not allow him to get closer. He decided to find out what caused this behavior, while at this time Gary was fighting with another, even though he was just a student. But they couldn't just remove him. They were too much trouble. Although he was young, the boy was still able to defeat the enemy, demanding the truth, but another attacked him, knocking him down. The guy flew back from the blow. It seemed to him that the man was trying to save his comrade. How wrong he was. Red Mask threw the enemy into the fire, not giving him a chance to survive, because he, being wounded, could not be useful for the success of the operation. Gary stood up, looking at the man who was burning in the fire, screaming for help. These guys didn't seem to spare even their comrades. Ray, who was fighting with the others at the time, noticed that the man was actually afraid of a head-on collision. The friend tried to help, but the red-haired man said that he should rest. He knew exactly how to defeat these bastards. The guy grabbed the sword in his teeth and began to attack the man, in his opinion, such bastards as he did not deserve to stay alive. He believed that their betrayal was unforgivable, because a man was ready to sacrifice the lives of his fellow men for the sake of success. Ray tried to attack him, but the chest armor was extremely strong. He was unable to penetrate it. The man not only had an inferno sword, but also special armor all over his body. This time they prepared thoroughly. He understood that if things continued like this, his equipment would not be able to withstand it, and would break. He needed to find another way out. At this time, Noel was dealing with the second mask. The man thought that the beast was strong, but it turned out that it was a mid-level magical beast. However, the animal was not stupid. It understood that it was worth confusing the enemy, and it succeeded. The man believed that it was a simple trick that he easily figured out. Gary saw what was happening to his friend's animal. He had to help. He had already grabbed the monster, swinging to kill it. But then the blonde arrived, snatching the wolf from the clutches of death. He held the sword tightly across the other man's weapon, asking him to stop. And he noticed that the blonde was quite strong for a child. However, if he was eager to die instead of this animal, then the latter did not want to hinder him. He pushed him aside, deciding to deal with him. Gary grabbed his leg, not letting him move. He told him to take the sword and fight like his master. He swung, wanting to quickly finish off one problem in the person of the blonde. But he grabbed it tightly, and then he was stopped. The animal grabbed the sword and cut off the hand holding the weapon. The mask could not understand how this was possible. The second one turned around and, seeing this picture, decided that he was useless. And Ray, noticing this, decided to attack, breaking his mask. He wanted to see how he would dodge his blow, but his mask cracked and he saw Lancey's squire. He could not understand why he did this, because he was a knight himself, and moreover, their teacher. Gary, seeing Lancey, screamed at him, not understanding what exactly motivated him when he tried to kill them. Lancey, not letting him finish, immediately attacked him, answering him that it didn't matter, because he was supposed to die anyway. Ray shouted for the boy to start dodging the attack, but Noel arrived in time, blocking the boy from the blow. The animal was already wounded, Ray shouted at him, telling him to go back. He canceled the call. Lancey began to attack him, shouting that he would definitely get rid of him. The red-haired man looked at him with disgust, thinking that in the human race there would always be scum in the form of Sir Lancey. He understood that the man's intentions were not important, but for some reason he decided to drag others into it. He swung, wanting to deliver the final blow. He didn't understand whether he really enjoyed hurting others so much, whether he really needed to get rid of him. He knew the man had to answer for this. The absorption of the elements was activated. Lancey thought the sword was sucking the strength out of him. He expected the fire to kill him, but it turned out differently. He was supposed to die today. Lancey kept waiting for the enemy's forces to run out. But soon he noticed a strange thing. The flame was getting weaker, but the young man still did not give up. He began to pull the sword back so that it would not suck all the energy out of him. The knight could not understand why the youth was so strong. It was too difficult to get rid of him. The guy felt like he had several pairs of broken ribs. It was time to end it. The man kicked the man, pushing him away from himself. It was impossible to let him absorb the energy of the sword. The breastplate was almost broken. He had almost no time left, but he remembered that he had to hold out until the knights arrived. The fire element he had absorbed was exactly the kind of magic he could use. He decided to combine chi and fire element magic. Now he could use it as his own weapon. Lancey looked and could not understand that in front of him, the red-haired man seemed to be exactly a demon. They should have killed him at the very beginning. Lancey ran at him, attacking, but Ray managed to attack first, depriving him of a limb. The sword of Inferno no longer responded. He was defeated. The dragon grabbed him. The glove was on fire. Lancey's time was up. He pushed him towards the fire, ending this fight. Screams were heard from behind. Lancey got what he deserved. People were running towards him. Among them he could only make out Sir Kay, and that was completely blurry. His head began to spin. The guy had already fallen to the ground, losing consciousness. The knights who came running said that purebloods had attacked, and it was necessary to report to Winford. The boy's face and hands were badly damaged. He needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. Sir Kay's voice could be heard. He succeeded. The guy woke up with a pain in his head. A familiar ceiling was in front of his eyes. A familiar smell hit his nose. He recognized the infirmary. He was there again. He felt some kind of heaviness on his body. The guy rose to look around the room and noticed that Skavia's head was lying on the bed, seemingly dozing. The girl, feeling the movement, immediately began to rise and saw that her friend had woken up. She just wanted to tell him something when he interrupted her with a question. She said that almost 3 days had passed, but all his wounds were treated in time, so he had nothing to worry about. He was recovering quickly. The guy felt a slight burning sensation on his lips, but it gradually became easier. The girl went to the guys to say that the red-haired guy woke up. Everyone came in. The last one to enter the room was Sir Kay. He immediately cast some kind of spell. In the place where the handle was, some signs began to appear. The textures of the room around seemed to disappear, and then returned. The man said that now their conversation would not be overheard. They could begin. Ray, raising his bandaged head, looked at his mentor with his healthy eye and asked what was going on. He looked around the room, into which several people entered at once. All the red-haired ones who had been admitted were here. Sir Kay began to speak. He began by saying that 2 students had been attacked literally 3 days ago. This became a serious threat to the lives of not only Ray and Gary themselves, but also other students. He and Winford discussed this issue and decided to talk to them. However, before doing so, Mr. K asked Ray if he knew who the people who attacked them were. The guy nodded. Ray began to say that there were 3 of them, all wearing red masks, but he could not recognize the identities of 2 of them. They died. The 3rd one was Lancey's squire. The guy remembered that day as if it were yesterday, when Lancey removed the remaining part of the mask from his face and then attacked. The boys listened to him, not believing what he said. He was a knight. He himself was with them. Kyle said that he felt that he was a bad person. Scavia asked if they were from a dark guild, since it was a forbidden organization. But Mr. K stopped him, saying that this was not the case. They were attacked by people from a guild called the Purebloods. Unlike the Dark Guild, the Purebloods had many supporters in the Avrian Academy. There were rumors that their supporters were also among the elders. The guys were shocked, not understanding how this was happening, how the elders could allow this. The boys said it was a real crime. Sir Kay began to calm them down, saying that Winford and he had agreed, but it wasn't that simple. Ray looked at Knight K and asked what exactly the people of the Pureblood Guild wanted. Sir Kay said that Ray could have guessed already. It was all in the color of their hair, because there were other red-haired guys here. The guy understood what was going on. They wanted to get rid of them, and that particular evening they needed him. The boys couldn't believe it. Juan was happy that they could finally start using real swords, not wooden ones. But Duo didn't share his joy. Sir Kay said that the whole point was that there was a second part to the prophecy. The prophecy 11 years ago spoke of a red-haired boy. He could either be the savior or the destroyer of the world. But there were knights who valued their lineage and their origins highly. They couldn't accept the fact that their lineage could be at risk because of several children. Kale became indignant, not letting the man finish. Unfortunately, many thought so. Scavia noticed that on the other hand, there were fierce battles on the border of the kingdom, and knights were needed to protect the state. In addition, it was necessary to maintain the smooth operation of the entire academy. For this reason, the upper echelons could not deal with the Pureblood Guild. The incident that happened showed them that the Pureblood Guild's behavior was not spontaneous. They had no intention of stopping. Sir Kay said that they should always be vigilant. The man made sure that there were sleeping people near the boys. Winford and Sir Kay promised to look after the boys themselves, but there were only 2 of them, so the children had to be on their guard at all times. The boys knew they had to get stronger, or they might get into trouble. Sir Kay laughed and said that they were right, for those who relied on others soon became corpses in Sir Kay's experience. The man laughed and then asked the guys to go out to talk to Ray, and they all started leaving silently. A week later, he was already leaving the hospital satisfied and happy, stretching because his body was stiff from lying down. The guy was finally able to get out of the ward another week there, and he would have definitely gone crazy from boredom. The dragon's gloves were in terrible condition, as was the breastplate, and they needed to be repaired before they broke completely. The boy understood that his Wolf Knoll's life was not in danger, but he needed time to recover. To restore the pet, you needed a lot of medium monster crystals. Now you had to go hunting. The guy kept thinking about his conversation with Sir Kay, and now he couldn't relax. He was told that he was most likely the boy mentioned in the prophecy, and all because he was different from others in some way. The guy's body was often in a terrible state, but still healed itself. Even though the guy tried to hide it, he saw that he had mastered some kind of magic. Ray didn't know how to explain it all. He couldn't say that he was a dragon in his past life. He would be considered crazy. Besides, he was a brunette as a child, and then turned red. He understood that this was due to the fact that the dragon's power remained in him, and also a strange system. The man's words inspired confidence in him. He warned that the Pureblood Guild was clearly interested in eliminating him, so he had to be careful. Dealing with Lancey wasn't that easy. The next person they had to send would definitely be even stronger. The guy understood that he couldn't sit idly by, and at that moment Elder Gibby was watching him from the window. He didn't even think that Lancey could be useless. He had enough high-level equipment and first-class fighters at his disposal to get rid of this child. Fortunately, the squire died without revealing the secret, but Kay and Winford had already guessed everything, and the Elder began to put on a mask. The city was too unsettled, but the Elder was not afraid of this. He ordered Delbert to be brought. He obviously had to come. One of the original knights was so eager to prove his loyalty. Now he had a chance to rock the boat. Ray returned to the hostel in the evening and was greeted very warmly by his friends in his room. The red-haired man immediately collapsed on the bed. The guys noticed that he had a lot of bruises, but he began to calm them down. He said that they showed up after the martial arts club. Martha and Scavia came into the room, saying that Gary had received a letter. They gave the letter to the guy and, noticing Ray, said hello, asking how he was. Their friend smiled at them and said that he was fine. Martha noticed that the guy's hair had grown a lot and he should go get a haircut. Dan was the first to intervene, offering a hairstyle like his. He quipped, asking who would want to be like the dark-haired man, and then turned towards Kale. His red-haired friend offered him a shaved head like his. He was the second to butt in, but Ray refused, and then asked what the guy had forgotten in their room. The guys said that there was a free space in the room, and now Kale had moved in with them. Ray's gaze fell on Gary during the conversation. Ray began to say that Kale was extremely meticulous, and seeking support from his friend, asked him if he minded his presence. The guy looked at the paper in his hands, not reacting to anything. A second later, he already rushed out of the room. A surprised Ray ran after him, and the boys remained standing there surprised, not suspecting or understanding anything. The guy immediately activated the Dragon Eye mode to find the blonde guy who had lost sight of him for the moment. The Dragon Knight looked down the entire corridor until he saw that he was on the roof. He immediately headed there. It was night outside. The moon was shining, the sky was clear, the stars were twinkling. The blonde man sat and looked into the distance. Ray called him, but he did not respond. He approached the guy, asking what was happening to him and why he suddenly ran away. Everyone was worried about him. The guy started telling that the letter he received was about his sister Amy. Ray immediately became wary. Memories of the golden-haired girl Amy, who had been with him throughout his childhood, flashed through his head. Like a bolt from the blue came the quiet. She died. From Gary. He bowed his head, burying his forehead in his knees. Ray froze. Phrases once said to him by the golden-haired girl who left without saying goodbye, hoping to definitely meet again, flew through his head. The guy hadn't had the opportunity to properly thank her for everything she had done for him all these years. He kept thinking that he would definitely have time to thank her, that he would definitely see her. Her voice continued to echo in his head. The boy subconsciously responded to the echo that had called her, searching in his head for echoes of that same little girl. The guy stood and cried, not finding the strength to take a step forward, a step towards his friend, who now so needed his support. Gary began to talk about the dream he had seen, about the terrible nightmare that had come true. He dreamed of Amy being torn to pieces by monsters at Roland's academy, in the palm of the god's hands under the watchful eyes of the nobles. Helpless, he now realized that this was not just a nightmare, it was a real curse. The prophecy that he tried to forget as something terrible, and which eventually caught up with him. Tears flowed down his cheeks. The boy's parents wrote that the academy's nobles offered their family a large sum of money as compensation. He didn't understand at all how this happened. The enraged blonde squeezed something in his hand, throwing it into the void, his scream echoing in the red-haired man's ears. Gary understood that for them, the villagers whose family they were trying to buy off with money had simply died. And tomorrow these aristocrats were supposed to sit at the table and eat foie gras and talk about their own problems. Ray looked at his friend. He couldn't calm down. Gary was right. His sister's death could only become dinner gossip for them. This could not be forgiven. He vowed to find the one who killed his sister, tears streaming down his cheeks. Gary didn't know what to grab onto. His eyes were like those of a cornered animal. He began to sniffle, vowing to respond in kind to the one who took the life of his little sister. Ray didn't cry. He still didn't believe and didn't understand that the blonde's words were true. But he put his hand on the blonde's shoulder, promising to help. He was ready to take revenge for Amy. Gary immediately grabbed his friend by the shoulders and said that he could transfer to Roland's academy. Magic had awakened in him. He saw with his own eyes the magic of fire in him. He could summon animals. If he transferred, he would be able to find a person. But the red-haired man was not satisfied with this arrangement. He immediately stopped him, said that his abilities, of course, were not the most ordinary. But there was one but. He understood that if he told, they would only start to keep a closer eye on him. And if they transferred him to Roland's academy, then how would he leave his friend? They had to find a way to leave the academy together. But Gary didn't understand how exactly they could do that. He knew he had to graduate from the academy and then serve there for 2 years as a volunteer. His hands were tied. But Ray had a plan. He told him about the upcoming academy tournament. He knew that a place in the top 5 would ensure them a trip to the Tournament of Nations. At this time, in the third-year dormitory, where there was almost no one, sat Jay Gurley, who met Harry Delbert in the room. The guy asked where the guys were, to which he received an answer in which he was told that everyone was preparing for the tests. The guy noted that everything was the same every year. There was nothing new. They didn't think anyone could beat them. They didn't plan on giving anyone a chance. Jay noticed that Kira had gone on a mission and would not be there, while Monk, Kale, and Ray were walking towards Gary, discussing the upcoming start of the trials. Kale and Monk began to question Ray about why Gary was training non-stop. but the guy asked them to leave his friend alone for a while. Gary fought with the puppet, thinking that it was not enough, sweat running down his face, his hands tightly gripping the sword. The guy fell to one knee, leaning his hands on the sword. His strength was running out, but he still tried to get up. The guy didn't understand how he could be so weak, and he was distracted from his self-digging by Mr. K, who called them into the armory to give them something. The boys looked around until they were brought to the main table, on which lay the armor and weapons of those people who had attacked them at night in the forest. Sir K said they could take whatever they wanted. He brought everything he could into a divine form. Gary grabbed the knives, examining them. They were sharp. He settled on them. Monk at this time examined Lancey's armor. Kale also asked the knight to take something for himself, and the man was not against it. He knew that the tournament could give them a lot, so he hoped that the guys would not let him down. He said that every year, noble families attend the tournament as spectators, and the boys could receive an invitation from one of them if they proved themselves. After graduating from the academy, they could become their knights. The job was quite good. Gary thought about Mr. K's words. An unkind smile appeared on his face. At this time, the Dragon Knight examined the sword. It was familiar to him. It was Lancey's sword. It had lost its fire magic property and became a very ordinary sword. Mr. K suggested the guy to choose some other weapon. Ray knew that he himself had absorbed all the flames of this sword. He thought about the ability to absorb elements. The boy, wandering through the forest in search of something important, thought about how absorbing the elements could be very, very useful. The place he needed was hidden very well, but he was able to find it. It was an ice cave. He looked at the ice monsters that roamed below, their eyes glowing with blue flames. Ray waited for the moment when he could attack. As soon as the golem came closer to the ledge where he was sitting, the guy immediately released an ice ball in his direction. At his command, Noel appeared and growled at the golems, who began to grunt at him in response. The guy, seeing the number of golems, understood why it was so difficult for him to get to this place. He looked at Noel and ordered him to go to the left. The night was long, but fun and very productive for the Dragon Knight and his demonic wolf. On the day of the Avrian Academy tournament, which took place 3 weeks later, people from all over the country began to flock to the castle grounds. The waiting room was full of people. Some were talking to each other. Some were waiting silently. For example, Harry was talking to the girl he had fought with last year. Marta, here, ran to the guys, what to say, that the rules of the tournament were changed this year. Monk decided to clarify what exactly was changed. Marta began to speak, but her speech was interrupted. The knights were already here. It was time to begin. People began to whisper. The pink-haired girl told everyone to give her silence, then asked the top 5 second and third years to step forward. The guys looked at each other, not understanding what exactly they wanted from them. Scavia started asking Monk, but he himself was not in the know. The girl noticed that there was no third year. Everyone was thinking about their own things. One girl from the third year reported that everyone was in place except for one boy, Kira. He was on a mission. The woman nodded, showing that she had taken note and asked about a certain Jay. The guy who was named laughed and said that he was here too. Ray watched the third-year student. He was ranked first in the academy. Tarun knew he was a living legend, but he didn't think he would come. Monk said that he was unlikely to give the third years a break, and Dan began to doubt their victory altogether. The team of third-year students came forward closer to the woman. She announced that everyone standing there and a certain Kira would automatically advance to the next stage of the tournament. Everyone was shocked. Kale complained that they were pushed forward just like that, and Ray said that it was his fault that he was not among those guys. He still didn't calm down, thinking that he could hit Dan. Ray just nodded, and the host announced the rules of the first qualifying match. She began to explain that the first round, a royal battle, would be held separately for the second and third years, and then asked Ian to come to her. He, in her opinion, looked quite strong. The guy took a few steps forward, pointed a bow and arrow at him, announced that only wooden weapons could be used. Each participant's bracelet was given 100 life points, and when a person was hit, the points were reduced. If you use chi when attacking, the damage dealt will increase, but if you use chi when defending, the damage received will be lower. Everyone began to look at their bracelets, where 100 points were awarded when life points dropped to 0. A person was considered a loser and was removed from the battlefield. Before leaving, she told the second-year students to get ready. Hand over their weapons, take the wooden ones, and go into the arena. Ray, examining the weapon, settled on the sword. After all, it was more familiar to him, and he could hold it in his teeth if necessary. It was hot outside. The wind was blowing, not giving any coolness. The guy in uniform looked at the arena, squinting his eyes. He knew that he would win. In general, the arena was quite large. There was room to move around. The guy understood that sufficient preparation would allow him to win. The second-year students nervously looked around the audience. There were a lot of people. Everyone was feeling excited, and anticipation was taking hold of them. The first round was announced, and Elder Gibby was waiting to see the red-haired boy. Elder Feng looked at his disciple with concern. He believed that he could win, but he was worried that the guy would overdo it. Ray left thoughtfully, his head down. The unknown still weighed on him. He couldn't lose. He couldn't even imagine that something like this could be allowed at the Academy tournament with so many influential people present. Sebastian's friend, he recognized him. They set a trap for Ray. It's ridiculous. But Ray wasn't going to give up. He remembered Amy. He remembered why he was here. Sebastian walked in front of everyone, his face not hiding the defeat he had experienced. Had he really come to avenge his appearance? However, the boy, whose father was a mercenary, knew how to see ahead, and therefore decided to use him as a shield. The three fleeing ones immediately attacked with swords, but they did not have time to dodge so as not to hit their leader. The blow took 30 life points from the blonde at once, and he couldn't even scream, only groaned in pain. His friend yelled at them instead, but they couldn't do anything. It all happened too quickly. However, Sebastian tried to escape from the hands of others. He had to justify the family name, but it didn't work out, of course. The village boy had much more strength. The nobleman stumbled over his own words. With his life points down to 0, Sebastian Delbert was disqualified, remaining outside the arena where Ray had thrown him. Gibby watched Knight Delbert's reaction closely. He knew that he was ready to tear the boy to pieces. But besides Delbert, there was a real crowd of people who wanted to do it. They surrounded the guy, and a game of survival began. The fire seemed to be coming from the guy's chest. Thanks to the absorbed fire magic, he himself was fire. His gaze was burning. He looked down on them. He understood that the children of nobles had nothing but the status of a nobleman. This was their downside. They attacked in a crowd, so none of them would have stood up to it alone. But the guy wasn't going to retreat. Training at the martial arts club helped him a lot. Not only did he develop his chi skill, but he also improved his technique. The guy was literally flying around the arena. He crept up on his opponents like a shadow, attacking and preventing them from attacking. Everyone was thinking about their own things while looking at the arena, but Harley saw this red-haired child as a real opponent. Ray did not feel sorry for anyone. He understood that such people cannot be pitied. He was taught from childhood to give what they deserved. The guys didn't know how to react. Scavia, for example, thought that Ray was cruel. But Gary looked at everyone except his friend with great disappointment. They attacked 10 against 1 and still lost. What nonsense. The Dragon Knight saw no way back. Thoughts about the girl Amy flew through his head. No one envied the guy's opponents. No one wanted to end up on the other side of the arena. The friend seemed to have gone into a frenzy. The people criticized Tarun, not thinking that the boy fought alone against everyone. The people were afraid of red hair. But Ray himself had improved his skills during his hunt with Noel. So he heard well, and saw everyone who said it. The elders began to whisper. The first to arouse concern was Gibby. He saw this as an excellent chance to remove the guy. And among the rest, there were those who also considered the boy dangerous, referring to the first part of the prophecy. But Elder Feng did not allow anyone to doubt the guy. He believed in him. He vouched for his favor. No one argued. They just glanced from under their masks. It seemed they didn't agree. Tarun removed people from the battlefield with one blow. Although he felt tired, he fought. Everyone commented in their own way. Everyone assessed the guy and his skills. But everyone saw his talent. Third-year Harry, who had the chance to win it, noted that it actually has great potential. Everyone fought at their best, although credit must be given to the Black Belt Knights. The twins Huang and Duo worked harmoniously, like a single mechanism, although they had completely opposite views of the world. Ray looked at the boys lying and groaning in pain. Victory brought no pleasure. He remembered imagining his meeting with Amy after a long separation while lying in the infirmary. Her smile remained a dream that could not come true. He decided it was time to finish with the last one. At this moment, everyone became tense. No one knew what the red-haired boy could do. But Ray knew what he needed. He looked from under his brows, taking the guy's chi. He screamed, not understanding what was happening, while warmth spread throughout the Dragon Knight's body. The decisive blow, another enemy is defeated. The elders looked on with apprehension. They couldn't allow Ray Tarun to lose control of himself. Elder Feng immediately stopped any further talk, noting that no one had stopped 10 people from attacking one. There was one last guy left in the arena. Ray was already getting ready to rest, but it was not to be. 2 arrows flew at him one after the other, flying past, frightened by the target like their owner. The guy simply dodged, not understanding what she was waiting for. Whether the girl was looking for adventure or death. However, she did not retreat. Although she was afraid, it was obvious from the eyes she hid. She wanted to win. She didn't know how, but she believed she could, even though her confidence was falling with every second. The arrows were running out. The plan of action was failing. She began to panic. In her panic and attempt to think of something, she did not notice how defeat crept up on her. He grabbed her by the neck, lifting her off the ground. He knew no mercy. Did anyone know it when Amy was dying? Only Ray froze, it seemed. His heart stopped beating when he heard his father start screaming. His chest was squeezed with pain and envy. His father was not his. Someone called him a monster. I wonder if his dad would have stood up for him. He wanted him to be proud of him so much. He missed him so much. My father helped people all his life, but in the end, his kindness was his undoing, even though he had done nothing wrong. And all his father wanted was for his wife to kill him. What irony. Memories overwhelmed the guy. He gathered chi into a fist. He did not understand why someone had everything, but he did not have his dad. His friends stopped him. They knew that they would not forgive him for this mistake. Marta and Kale began to try to bring him to his senses. He needed to calm down. Duo and Juan locked the girl up. They couldn't do anything to her like they did to those guys. She wasn't guilty of anything. The guy turned around, walking towards the guys. Other thoughts began to visit his head. He was confused. He remembered how his friends supported him when he received a letter from his dad. He remembered how Kale believed in him despite the fact that he had almost no chance in a fight with the son of the knight Delbert. He didn't know how to react. He didn't understand that they were on his side. It seemed like his friends had turned their backs on him. They knew nothing about him. They didn't know about his childhood, his life, that he had lost his first friend, the person closest to him after his parents. But the boys knew that if they had to fight a friend to stop him from doing something stupid, they would fight him. The guy's eyes were shining again. He accepted the challenge. The first was Kyle, whose chain held his arm, squeezing his skin uncomfortably. The friend flew ahead, losing life points, and he will have to spend a long time recovering in the infirmary. But he didn't finish there, deciding to finish him off. He could only hiss and scream in pain. If they wanted to stop him so much, then why didn't they just knock him out? He simply didn't understand their actions. He decided to give everyone advice. Kale had to train harder and start using chi. Next in line was Marta, but even several arrows fired at once could not hit the guy. He grabbed the flying arrows with his bare hands, which subsequently flew at their owner. She managed to dodge them, but did not have time to escape Ray's attack. He told her to stop hesitating. The girl fell, feeling pain spread through her body, but she felt no fear towards the guy. Next in line was the duo of Juan and Duo. The twins decided to use the element of surprise. They fell into their own trap. The boys tried to land carefully so that they could put up a fight. But before they even had time to realize it, the guy was behind them, as if laughing at them, showing them how it should be done. The twins were the last ones left. Only the girl remained. Gurley watched the arena carefully while someone watched him. There was deathly silence. Everyone heard their own thoughts and was afraid that others would hear them, afraid that the red-haired boy would hear them. Ray walked towards her, didn't look into her eyes, looked at his friends. Consciousness returned to him. The girl cowered in front of him. He looked into her eyes. They reflected the flame that burned in his eyes. He touched her forehead, asking for forgiveness. But it seemed he wanted to say this not to her, but to the boys who lay behind them. He left silently, unable to find the strength to look back, afraid to see disappointment and resentment in the eyes of his friends. And as he left, he wondered if he could have done the same to Amy, and if she would have condemned him and come out against his actions. The young man's head was tormented by various thoughts. He reproached himself, while someone found him very capable. The defeated boys were found to have mana disease. It was difficult to say whether they would recover. The child hid his abilities. No one was supposed to know about it. The information had to remain secret. He left as a winner, but there was a hole in his soul. It seemed like he was losing something important again. However, the world did not stand still. Preparations were underway for the next tour. Gary was training hard. With each defeat, the puppet increased the difficulty level, and the boy honed his skills. He knew that in battle people do not only clash sword to sword, he learned to see more advantageous ways to inflict damage. The puppet, however, was not stupid. It not only hit, but also defended itself well. He remembered his friend and considered every victory a defeat. He always wanted to reach the same level. He remembered Sir Kay's words. He should have received this invitation. His hand tightened on the sword. He remembered his sister. He had to win. He had to avenge her. The third years were also preparing for the next round. Harry was watching Gary Brubard. The boy was not bad, but as soon as he moved away, he immediately hanged himself, deciding to try to defeat the puppet. He had his own goals in this. The attacking puppet was not a real opponent for him. He chose two moves, a win-win strategy. A blow to the stomach, and then to the puppet's chest. The level was completed. Gary took this gesture as a challenge, and was saved from the fight by Scavia, who immediately dragged him away to get ready. The guy was nervous and couldn't think straight, but the girl stopped him, not letting him make a mistake. Saved, like Marta, Kale and the twins recently saved Ray. She scolded him until she saw that he came to his senses and his gaze cleared. He followed her, deciding to really prepare for the match. He needed some rest. The boys walked in silence until they heard familiar voices. One of them definitely belonged to Ray. The boys stopped and carefully looked out, looking around the corner. Their friend did not look happy. Gary began to listen carefully. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. The shock was slowly giving way to misunderstanding and resentment. Knight Winford was also puzzled by the guy's behavior. After all, he won. But he did not oppose someone else's decision. The man knew what the boy had gone through, and therefore decided to support him. The next battle was announced to begin soon. But Winford never told the boy that he would try to support him in everything. He said they would discuss it later, and as Ray left there were tears in his eyes. Memories of his fight today were spinning in his head. The guy walked past, not noticing anything. It seems he wouldn't have even noticed his friends if they hadn't called him. The guys admitted that they heard everything, but the guy, wanting to go into solitude, said that everything was fine. He thought he could remain silent, but resentment got the better of him. He called out to the guy, stopping him, and went towards him himself. Gary couldn't understand how he could refuse to participate in the tournament. They had made a promise. But Ray didn't forget. She was his first friend. It's not like he didn't want to help Amy. He was afraid. Skavia knew that look. He was confused. He was afraid. Skavia's words pinned him to the spot. The girl saw that she was right. The guy felt guilty for offending his friends, innocent people. But he wasn't to blame. No one blamed him. The guys admired him. They wanted to help him. Gary knew firsthand what his friend had gone through. He himself had been partly the cause of what had happened in their childhood. He put his hand on his shoulder. His eyes looked at his friend with care and love. He promised himself that he would not leave his friend. The blonde smiled, promising that he and the boys would always be his family. He knew that his friend would not leave him alone. People had already gathered in the arena. Dan and Martha were discussing the fight that had begun. The guys started listening. Gary couldn't understand why he was always so nasty, even though he was their friend. He was such a thorn in their side. Skavia didn't even listen to their squabble. She immediately went to Marta, who promised to watch carefully and tell her everything. The first was Harry Delbert. He was the only one who had not yet been hurt, although he was 50th on the list, but he was still quite capable. Gio had incredible strength and was physically fitter than many others. Sisters Zidong and Lu Shui were like twins. Their work was just as well coordinated. The next one that caught March's eye was Jasmine. Ray, Gary, and Monk recognized her right away. She turned out to be quite strong. The girl wore a black belt and was also in the top 5. Gary watched Harry Delbert. He remembered the incident with the puppet. The final battle remained. At the end of the third-year battle, the judges selected 20 finalists, more than they should have. Winford looked at Ray as he spoke, and the boys' decision to move on was met with great enthusiasm. The second-year students showed very good results, so it was decided to change the rules a little. The man smiled at the boy, glad that he heard his words. Gary, looking at the table, remembered the incident in the training room. He had to fight with that same Harry. In his heart, the guy was happy. He saw an opportunity to take revenge for that prank. Skavia was worried about him and about who she would fight. Jay Garley, who was Skavia's opponent, was a little upset that he couldn't fight that red-haired boy. Harry, who was standing next to him, said that the guy had grown a lot, and he himself would not mind fighting him again. At this time, 4 men were looking at the arena from the balcony, looking for someone. Winford told everyone to prepare for the decisive battle and to rest. Then he let them go. The battle was over for today. The guys left discussing the judge's decision and the new rules. Everyone was interested in how everything would go. Ray's opponent was that same Kira. I think he was in the top 5 in his 3rd year, but the guy never showed up, and his classmates said he was on a mission. Ray needed to think about it. He refused to go to training with his friends. His head was occupied with something else. He was thinking about his friend. He knew how important it was for Gary to win the tournament. His friend worked hard. They were both working towards the same goal. True, it wasn't just Amy who was the reason for his return. The rules were changed for a reason. He kept thinking about why the rules might have changed, how it related to purebloods, and what it gave them. Ray was alone in the room. His friends were still training. Silence enveloped his mind, and the decision was made to sleep. But his plans changed dramatically when he saw a piece of paper under his pillow. The man appointed a time and place when and where he wanted to meet him. Mr. K's words kept playing in my head, asking me not to walk alone and to be careful. There was no one around. The guy didn't know what to think. He wanted to believe that the trap wouldn't be too boring, but the guy couldn't even imagine how right he was. The dragon's gaze gave nothing. The arena was empty. The shadow began to crawl towards Ray from behind. Tarun froze, listening to the approaching steps. You should have seen the look on the guy's face when he saw Jay Gurley in front of him. The guy was a real titan, very tall and very pumped up, and there was only a year difference between them. The third-year student had been waiting for this all day. Finally, he could fight without extra people nearby. Ray thought the guy came from the Purebloods, but Harley didn't know who it was. Ray realized that the guy was only interested in the fight. He didn't see any interest, so he just started to leave. However, Harley was not going to let Ray go so easily. He understood this from the scream from behind. The reaction did not fail its owner at all. At the last second, he managed to grab the sword flying towards him. His opponent's strength was enormous, and it seemed that his gloves were barely helping him defend himself. The third year didn't even hear that he didn't want to fight. He saw that the younger one was strong. Harry didn't deceive him. He was able to withstand his attack. Garly made it clear that he would not leave here until their fight took place. Ray, looking at the guy, did not understand at all why he came here. He felt that it was not worth it. There was just one detail that caught the guy's eye, the silhouette behind Jay's back. He didn't immediately understand who it was. But later, he decided that he had come here for a reason. It seemed like the clue had come to him on its own. Ray managed to find out that similar masks were worn by people from the Pureblood Guild. He needed answers, and without thinking he ran towards the mask, pushing a third-year student out of the way. The guy with the white belt didn't expect this, not having time to react while Ray focused on the man in the mask. But he was not so simple. He was not alone either. He had a scythe in his hands. He blocked the red-haired man's attack, pushing him away from himself. The enemy was not as weak as he had assumed. He looked at his opponent, but saw only a shadow above, his irritation growing. Garly, who did not understand who was in front of him, immediately stood up to defend the guy, because he himself wanted to fight him. He decided to remove the man who had interfered with them. After all, he was strong. But for some reason they did not take him seriously. Although Garly was somewhat impenetrable, he had honor and valor, and the mask waved his hand, deciding to fight the white belt. Ray was immediately surrounded by 5 other masked men, ambushed again. But there was no need to despair. Garly, attacking again and again, still managed to comment on what was happening while his opponent could barely stay on his feet. And somewhere deep down, Ray was flattered that they only dared to attack him in a group they were afraid of him. One decided to attack from behind, but he did not take into account that he was fighting a black belt knight. The attack failed. He cut the air with his sword, barely keeping his feet as he landed. The guy was gone. He was in his element. He was in the dark. He had an advantage over the enemy. Even the weak light from the lanterns didn't help. All that was left was to wait until my eyes got used to the darkness. Ray loved the element of surprise the most. By the end of his first year, he was able to understand the charm of the Black Belt Knights, and he got a taste for it. True, unlike Ray himself, the enemy were already real knights, but whether that was all remained a mystery. The second-year student honestly admitted that the guys were good. They even knocked the sword out of his hands. The guy noticed that their weapons were not simple, and therefore decided not to engage in close combat with them. At this time, the big guy was fighting with the leader of the whole gang. The only thing that Garly didn't like was that he was constantly running away from him, waiting for the moment to hit. But even his blow, aimed straight at the heart, did not have the desired effect. The guy grabbed the blade of the weapon that had wounded him, and it seemed that the enemy was defeated. The third-year student's chi began to glow, spreading around him, and he was unable to control it. But he didn't think it was necessary. If for someone she was poisonous, then for him she was like good wine. He attacked, breaking the mask with his chi, and although he resisted, he was unable to withstand it. He fell, trying to get up, but Harley was advancing. He liked what was happening, but there was one thing. Despite the pleasant feeling, he lost the fight with the boy, and that could not be forgiven. Grabbing him right by the mask, he swung with a cry, delivering the decisive blow. The mask remained in the hands of the guy with the white belt, and its owner flew back a couple of meters. Could it really be another of his victories? The chi launched at the pureblood was incredibly powerful, causing a large sound wave. Ray still didn't understand how they hadn't been heard yet, and hadn't come here to check what was going on. More than himself, the boy loved only his weapon, which could withstand his strength. The enemy was not strong enough for him, although he liked it. But he had something else. Behind the mask was the same Kira who was supposed to fight Ray. The guy stood there, trying to gather his remaining strength. Considering there were any at all, Garly did not attack. The white belt mocked the pureblood, thereby causing him anger and irritation. They collided, but now face to face without masks. Ray's job was made much easier by Garly taking on their leader, but the 5 of them weren't so simple either. Ray's gloves were greatly saved by the ice protection of the golems he had recently visited. The guy disappeared again to gather strength. It was time to finish with him. Another stream of chi released by the third-year student knocked Kira out again. There was no more risk to take, so Kira started looking for something in his pockets. It was a plan B in case of any problems like Jay Garly. There was a purple bottle in his hands. Harley began to look in surprise at the boy's hand that opened the jar. Ray turned around at the big guy's shout and began to see what was happening. Kira took a few greedy sips. He didn't even need the dragon's gaze to know that it was a shadow plague. Garly also realized that this chi was somehow unusual. The bottle fell, breaking. Pain shot through his body and he screamed in pain as he transformed. The monster growled. Its black eyes with purple pupils began to search for its opponent. Ray, forgetting about his cover, shouted at Gurley to be careful. The guy froze, watching as the shadow plague rushed towards him. He understood one thing right away. He could not be exposed to the plague under any circumstances. Otherwise, he might turn. If before he had attacked, now he had to defend himself from incoming attacks. Ray was discovered by the other 5 because of his scream, but he was still thinking about something else. It was time for them to end this, or risk being caught in the crossfire. One of them shouted something at him, but he didn't even listen, releasing a fireball. Now the converted one was commenting on what was happening, attacking his classmate. The mockery did not affect the guy. He admitted that it was difficult for him to constantly defend himself in battle. The monster did not calm down. There was no weapon against the shadow plague. Kira growled angrily, his black eyes filled with purple light. Jay was in danger. Kira growled in anger. He pointed his sword towards Garly, but Ray managed to grab the weapon. Somewhere there, the rest of Kira's team were already screaming in pain. They, like the students from the first round, were unable to defeat the guy with 5 of them. The gloves weren't on edge yet thanks to the golem's ice protection. But the boy was worried that it wouldn't last long. Because the shadow plague attacked fiercely, it was not easy to defend. The attack was even more difficult. Gurley was amazed by the strength of the sophomore. He didn't expect him to have any magic at all. After all, the guy saved him. Gurley said that Kira's weapon was made from the crab monster's armor. Ray remembered that it reflected blows and contained a neurotoxin. Ray fought back without getting hurt, his chest armor and gloves helping him well. The guy noticed that the monster was a bit clumsy. He needed to take advantage of that. But he was also very smart, and Ray's attempt was immediately stopped. The guy didn't fall at all. He was able to land as Mr. K taught him. Ray watched carefully, realizing that the weapon was changing shape, which caused great discomfort. It was time for them to end this. Otherwise they could just die here. Jay came to Ray's aid. He gave the red-haired man his sword, seeing that he needed a weapon. Ray immediately grabbed the weapon with icy hands. Its size seemed to exceed his own. But more than that, it was heavy. Ray still didn't understand where this guy got so much strength from. But there was no time to think about it. Ray began to spin the sword, using fire magic. He wanted to live. The shadow plague collided with fire. The monster's spear was too thin for such a weapon. The chances of victory were small. But the guy had a plan B. Kira's threats didn't scare him. He used the golem's ice defense, and the weapon was immediately covered in a thick layer of ice. The monster did not expect this at all and did not have time to react due to surprise. Kira growled, flying back, the weapon falling from his hands. He was too vulnerable now. Ray had to be able to take advantage of it. That very final blow, Kira was defeated, giving many clues and reason for discussion. Ray promised himself that he would think about it later, come back to it again. But for now, he had to wait. Ray coughed. His throat was dry. It hurt to swallow, but he found the strength to get up. Ray almost used up his mana supply, but was unable to take it from Kira due to the infection. However, Kira's mask showed that he was a pureblood, but the potion he drank made his chi dark purple. The people of the Dark Guild had this. It seems that these guilds were connected by something. He was wrong. The secrets of the academy were so tangled. However, there was something else that caught his attention. The discovery of a new skill, and then the corpse under his feet. He decided to first tackle the second point, and then move on to the first. And in the process, he also grabbed a bottle with the remains of the potion. The boy understood that the potion was produced at the academy, and Winford and Sir Kay's entourage could not be trusted. He threw the bottle into the fire, thinking about his father, the place he loved so much. That was his undoing, indeed. The irony. The guy stood there for a minute, and then dragged the sword to its owner. He had no more strength, and the creaking was getting on his nerves. Harley was wounded, but his life was not in danger, and it seemed that even in this state he could defeat anyone. Harley leaned on his sword and stood up, towering over the sophomore like a rock. From now on, Jay Gurley's life belonged to Ray Taryn. He was his faithful assistant. Ray wasn't impressed by this speech at all. He was too tired. The guy called the wolf. Gurley was in shock. He was about to beat a second year who was much more capable than him. Ray told him to keep quiet about that night, and then ordered the wolf to take him to the infirmary. Ray himself did not go anywhere. Everything was healing for him anyway. He remembered Sir Kay's words. There were 2 days left before the tournament. He gave his equipment for repair, again, and went home. In the workshop, he remembered the new skill that the system had revealed to him. It was time to deal with it. They were still saying something behind his back. He heard everything. People still didn't change. They were afraid and hated. Ray found a mirror at home, removing the cloth from it and wiping off the dust, and he was in the reflection. The guy immediately opened the system, pressing the skill. Everything around instantly began to shine, as if he saw streams of chi around him. The body modification was complete. The guy stood and looked in the mirror, but did not see himself. In front of him stood a tall guy with tar-colored hair. Now this guy was walking down the street. The girls turned around, watching the young man. He attracted attention. It seemed that he was Valerian for girls, as for cats. They saw him off, also whispering. Now they no longer feared or hated him, but admired him. The guy was puzzled. Such a reaction depressed him. But now he was not limited in his movements. As soon as he entered the market, traders surrounded him, offering him something and not giving him a pass. Such a difference in people's behavior due to some kind of modification of the body is too hypocritical. Like people, however, trying to fight back, he noticed Scavia. She was his salvation. He immediately shouted, calling her, as if her gaze was a breath of fresh air. True, he forgot something. His appearance was different. She did not recognize him, asking who he was. He stood in a stupor for a second, not knowing what to say. It was time to master the art of brazenly lying to someone's face. He immediately said that he was interested in the tournaments she was participating in, and was looking forward to her match. The girl thanked him, noticed that he knew her family, and therefore asked his name. He thought, remembered his life as a dragon. When he could fly, his name was Sen. For a second it seemed that the wind was calling him to fly with him. The boy looked up from the sky and said his name was Ness, extending his hand for a handshake. They walked forward together, telling each other something about themselves, and no one bothered him anymore. The girl was heading to the armory to balance the weight of her sword, and the guy decided to go with her to look at the breastplate. This sword, made of high-quality tiger crystals with shark fins, was sent to her by her family. It was expensive. He would have had to work for years to make this sword. He and any child from a simple family. On the way, the guy entertained her by telling her that he worked as an adventurer and had been to many places. The girl admired him, and deep down she dreamed of going somewhere just like him. She considered people like him to be free adventurers. No one in this country could be absolutely free. Their conversation somehow died down, and then an explosion was heard somewhere far ahead. Everyone around was running in different directions. Someone hit Scavia a couple of times while running away from the fire. The boys rushed in that direction. People crowded around the fire site, discussing something. It was difficult to get through the crowd. The fire blazed, heating everything around. Ray tried to figure out what happened. The woman who was closest to the window screamed and cried, praying to the gods to save her child. This is what Ray heard, and then all the voices died away when Scavia called out to him, saying something. She said she would go inside, but he stopped her, leaving her there. She shouldn't have gone there. She could get burned, and the guy had fire magic. So after reading the spell, he went inside. As soon as he started using energy, his mana began to actively decrease. He turned on his dragon vision to find the children, who were hiding in the farthest corner. He had to hurry, otherwise he could be exposed, but help came to him that he did not even know about. The man cast the same spell as the boy, trying to dispel the fire, the white belt reflecting the light of the fire. The man called out to Scavia, greeting her as he continued to put out the fire. At some point, Ray himself came out of the burning building, carrying, as it turned out, 2 babies, not one. The woman, seeing her children, began to cry and ran to them. The tears began to flow even more loudly, but she no longer screamed. The man called others to help put out the fire. 3 older brothers immediately appeared before Scavia and greeted her. The guys immediately cast spells, which immediately began to cover the building with ice. By the time the fire was extinguished, Winford arrived with his knights, greeting the eldest sons of the Hart family. Ray barely managed to escape from there. The body modification helped him a lot. The guy figured everything out, and the system gave him a couple more abilities. The Endless Void created a space where Ray could store his gear while he was Ness. With the mana division skill, it wasn't so easy. When he was a dragon, he used this skill to save others. But back then, his mana was limitless. This skill was of little use now, but it could come in handy in the future. Ray knew that no matter where his prophecy led him, he had to have his own army. With the help of the subspace skill, he could expand everything. When there was enough mana, his army could become stronger. It was strange that this time he was given 2 skills for saving 2 people. He still didn't understand how the system worked. Ray suggested that the number of abilities comes from the number of lives saved. But his theory collapsed because in the battle with the Minotaur, he received only 1 ability. Perhaps because it wasn't he who won, but Mr. K? Ray was theorizing as he walked towards the academy. There were a suspicious number of people gathered around. He went to Ian and Kale to talk to them. Gary kept thinking about the fight, And Harry Delbert, he was worried, because he understood that he could not lose to him. Scavia stood with her brothers who had paid her a sudden visit, but she was very glad to see them. Scavia spoke to her brothers until her gaze fell on the red crown. The elders noticed this and began to watch her, asking who she was looking for with her eyes. Ray, noticing the girl's gaze, immediately went towards her, but as he approached, he began to notice the people around her. They began to greet the guy, introducing themselves. The oldest of them had a very strong aura. The man did not approve of the guy, but did not dispute his sister's choice and asked him to take care of his sister. But the guy said that his sister is a natural-born leader who takes care of everyone herself. Next, she showed John and Jack. The guys also served in the army, but the guys looked friendlier. The last one was Max, who was a student at Roland's academy. The guy said hello, but Ray didn't hear anymore. The red-haired man immediately started asking about Amy. He didn't even have time to say hello. He really wanted to know about his friend. The guy thought, remembering something. He knew little about this incident. The academy was not small after all. Tarun hung his head, sighing, and thanked him for his answer. Matthew said that it was time for them to go to the elders, as they had an errand, and told Scavia to go and rest. The girl waved goodbye, smiling. Ray watched Max go. There was a feeling that the guy hadn't told him the truth. He was right. Matthew noticed it too. He asked why the youngest didn't say anything, and he replied that his sister's friend did not inspire confidence, so he decided not to say anything. Matthew agreed with his brother. The red-haired one was strong, dangerous, and wasn't even afraid of their aura. But it was simply impossible to understand what he was thinking, so it was decided to observe the boy. The day of the competition arrived. Ray and Scavia stood and waited for the start. The second round was opened by a girl. It was important for her to take part in the Tournament of Nations. It seemed like her life depended on it. She looked down, beginning to speak more quietly. Ray looked at her and thought about how to help her. The girl was afraid of disappointing her parents. The girl really wanted to show them her importance. Ray grabbed her hand and pulled her away from prying eyes, without saying anything. He could lend his power to the girl for a while. His hands began to glow. The red-haired man warned that it would only work for 10 minutes. Time was limited. She listened attentively, remembering everything her friend said, hope glimmering in her heart. Warmth spread through her body and a glow began to envelop her. The chi that the boy transmitted was warm and soft, as if it was protecting her. She had never seen people who could share magic and take someone else's. It seemed she had never even heard of such people. The fight began. Scavia, a little more confident, went out to fight Jay Gurley. Ray watched her carefully, hoping that he could help, and then it was up to her. Jay Gurley came out into the arena, looking around the stands. It seemed like he was looking for someone. It seemed like he found someone. Gurley immediately started waving, shouting at her boss and greeting him, and the guys immediately froze. Dan looked at Ray suspiciously, realizing that it seemed like this was addressed to him. He shouted, offering to give in to the girl because she seemed close to him, but Ray told him to fight fairly. He looked at his rival and asked for forgiveness, because the boss himself had ordered him not to give in to her. Winford announced the start of the fight. Gurley saw the green light, immediately starting to run towards Scavia. The first blow miraculously left the arena intact. Scavia barely managed to jump back, saving herself from little Gurley. The girl understood that even with a shield, she would hardly be able to repel Gurley's blow. There was no talk of a counterattack. However, something had to be done. It was impossible to just run around the arena. And Harley kept attacking, the tattoo on his arm shining. Every blow, even without chi, shook the entire arena, but the girl deftly dodged. It was decided to start attacking back. She noticed that the guy's defense was full of holes. There was no certainty that it was not a trap, but it was worth trying, although the attempt was unsuccessful. Moreover, she didn't even leave a cut on him. It seemed like it was time to use Ray's power. Another blow caused Scavia's shield to crack, sending shards flying across the arena. She remembered about 10 minutes. Chi immediately spread throughout her body. It seemed that Harley's eyes lit up, and he began to attack the girl with renewed vigor. And time went on. The guy defended himself, but more often he attacked. The girl kept trying to find a moment when the guy would be vulnerable. She still managed to touch him, wounded him, but not seriously. Senior students watched from the stands, realizing that the girl had done the almost impossible. The second-year students were extremely underestimated, but Scavia's brothers really supported her, despite everything. But his friends were worried, because Scavia's strong blows only slightly wounded him. It seemed like the guy's body was made of steel. The guy relied too much on physical strength in defense. He didn't use chi. There were a lot of gaps. If the guy concentrated chi in one point, she would have a chance. She had to wait. A second later, Scavia hit Jay again. She wounded him again. Tactics and strategy did their job. But Jay didn't remain in debt, immediately hitting the place where the girl had been a second ago. She landed surprisingly gracefully. The shield was gone, only the sword remained. Rei knew that time had almost passed. She would not win, even though she tried hard. Her strength was running out. But she wanted to win. She couldn't let her parents down. The girl couldn't hold the sword in her hands. All she had to do was accept defeat. The guys watched the fight. They shouted, trying to somehow help and support. The girl was in danger. Harley, completely miscalculating his strength, wanted to strike. But Sir Kay and Sir Winford arrived in time. Winford stopped Jay's sword in time. Sir Kay took the girl. Jay Garley won. Winford announced the winner. The stands rejoiced, even congratulated the girl for being able to injure, although she did not win. She was sent to the infirmary, of course. Her friends were proud of her. They were worried, too. The red-haired one decided to go and visit her. Gurley, seeing Ray on the way, noted that his girlfriend was extremely capable. Harry and his classmate were discussing the fight. It seemed there was a lot of talent among their juniors. Winford was discussing something with the host, apparently about a certain Kira, who still hadn't arrived. The girl's brothers were not disappointed with her. They admitted that the knightly path really suited her. Marta smiled at the guy, said hello to Scavia. The red-haired man nodded and walked on. He understood that his chi would hardly be able to help much. The third-year student was a real titan. She was lying in the room, quietly snoring, upset by her defeat, and the guy's voice reached her ears. The girl did everything she could. There was no point in blaming herself. The enemy was extremely strong. She didn't think that was an excuse for her losing, but Ray didn't think she lost outright. The girl was worried that she would not be able to protect her friends in case of danger, but she was met with silence in response. He was confused, didn't know what to say. She couldn't worry about everyone forever, no matter what she wanted. It didn't depend on her strength or how strong she could become. He understood her feelings. Yes, she wanted to protect their team, protect him. Tears streaming down her face, her cheeks red with embarrassment. Her strength was half that of Tarun himself, but she still tried to protect them all. He sat down next to her, hugging her shoulders, trying to explain that she shouldn't have put such a burden on her shoulders. Ray took his chi. He thought they wouldn't need his help. He kept his distance from them. He made a mistake. When leaving, the guy asked her to rest and not worry about anything. Marta and the others would worry about her. The door closed, and before he closed it, he smiled at her, telling her that she didn't have to protect everyone. In the end, it was his job. He waved his hand at her, walking forward. He wanted to believe that he was doing the right thing. He walked past people looking at the stands. Everyone was discussing. Everyone was waiting for something. Kyle was in the arena. The guy still managed to win her over, and as he was taking her away, he kept reminding her about the date she had promised him for winning. Gary was thinking about his own things at this time. He was worried because his fight was next. He was thinking about his sister. Face to face, they were somewhat alike. The sun was hot on their faces. Harry was relaxed. Gary was assessing the situation. Ray asked what happened. They told him about Kale's fight, who gave it his all. You did everything for this date, it seemed. Not even for the sake of winning. Dan was still furious, not understanding how it happened. Monk asked how Scavia was doing. Gary's match was starting. Ray looked at his friend, supporting him mentally. The guy was ready to rush to help at any moment. He understood whether he would be able to win, but he knew that he would always be there. Harry Delbert was strong. He struck first, began to attack, not sparing his opponent. For Amy, for Ray, for their friendship, he had to win. The guy immediately got into a fighting stance, drawing his knives. He had to win. He believed that he would win. Harry Delbert wanted to see how strong the boy was, so he attacked first, taking the initiative. Harry's sword collided with the boy's knives, and a confrontation began. Gary had a chance to win, but he should have spent less time wasting his time and focused more on tactics. Gary put in the effort, but his opponent laughed, saying he didn't feel a thing. Gary was chasing a third year around the field. Dan was happy, and Ray was watching intently. Harry hadn't started to attack yet. With one movement, the third-year student knocks the knife out of the guy's hands. He got bored. The boy turned out to be ordinary. Gary's blows went nowhere. For some reason, he didn't even hurt him. The previous blow had hit his sword accurately, but there was no result. Harry didn't understand how this guy could be the first in their year. It seemed like it was better. It seemed that even that silver-haired girl was stronger than the guy. Harry decided to finish right away. However, Gary managed to react, dodging the guy's blow. He realized what exactly the boy's problem was. He was unable to sense the sword's aura, even though it was a black belt holder. Gary froze. The same phrase was buzzing in his head, knocking some memories out of the depths of his memory. Knight K explained to them about the sword's aura. It was a figurative expression made up for ease of understanding. It was a certain feeling. The children listened attentively to the teacher, watched him attentively. Sir Kay stopped near the candles and then asked them a question, looking at their reaction. The sword swung over the candles, but only one candle went out. The boys felt fooled. Aura was considered the ability to sense the trajectory of an enemy's attack. They could develop this sense closer to the end of their training. Not everyone could master the aura. Some considered it a myth, since they had never experienced the aura. Descriptions of people who experienced the aura varied, and it was difficult to prove its existence. It was something like mysticism, but it was still possible to feel it. Gary assumed that some kind of push was needed. Sir Kay said it was different for everyone, but it was always on the brink of life and death. It seems he understood what he needed, and therefore did not reflect the blow. But the elders wanted to stop everything. The guys didn't understand why he was doing this and were worried about their number one. But Ray believed in his friend. He knew that he would never give up. The guy looked at him, didn't move, waited for the blow, waited for the situation when he would be on the verge of life and death. To give it its due, the second year was damn tenacious. It was hard to get rid of it. Harry offered the boy to surrender, but he refused. He thought about his sister. He couldn't give up. Harry heard the enemy's answer, accepted it, and decided to act more forcefully. He didn't waste time since he didn't want to give up. It was time to end this. He was breathing heavily, looking into the blonde's eyes. He was close to his goal. The guy closed his eyes, starting to listen. Someone was calling him, shouting to him about something. He didn't hear anyone. He just froze, starting to breathe calmly. The voices around him began to fade away. There was nothing around. There was emptiness in his mind. He listened to footsteps nearby. The elders watched. One ordered Sir Kay to be nearby in case of anything. Everyone froze, waiting. At the last second, Gary managed to use his sword for defense and was able to block the blow. Sir Kay, who was standing nearby, exhaled calmly. There was no need to interfere. Harry pulled himself together, seeing that the guy had also pulled himself together. After all, the fight could become interesting. He succeeded. He was able to see the aura of the sword. It seemed that this was what Sir Kay was talking about. Delbert attacked again, but Gary, who saw the sword's aura, now counterattacked. Delbert didn't expect him to be able to do it, and it took him a while to realize he had become so capable. Gary began to advance again, chasing the boy across the field. Now Harry was starting to like the second year. He fought pretty well after all. But Gary couldn't stand him, even though deep down he knew he had helped him a lot. The match was over. Gary Brubard had won. The stands were jubilant. Friends were shouting the blonde's name. It seemed that the enemy did this on purpose. He saw no other reason for such an outcome. He just silently listened to the junior student's arguments, looking him over from head to toe. But he replied that he didn't understand what the guy was even talking about. Gary was covered in bruises and out of breath. Harry Delbert was completely unharmed. He did not believe him. He left defeated. But still, Brubard's victory did not make him happy. The guy fell right in the arena. His strength was exhausted. His body's resources were almost completely spent. Monk wanted to go help, but Ray told everyone not to worry. He himself was worried inside. He was worried, but he knew his friend could handle it, so he turned his attention to the next fight. It was Marta's turn. Her rival was Cherry. The first one was worried, although she didn't show it. Here Cherry was absolutely calm. She, seeing that the opponent was an archer, decided to take a bow, but she couldn't resist making sarcastic jokes. But Marta didn't hear them. She was looking at Monk. She reassured her friend, saying that she could handle it, and Dan began to joke, saying that he had fallen in love. Cherry asked if she was the same Martha. Knight Ross called her special. She had heard about her. The girl noticed that she had arrows and a bow. Although she was not an archer, she had a white belt. The fight between Martha and Cherry began. The stands froze. The girl fired one arrow. It was necessary to check the level of her opponent's training. But she calmly shot an arrow in response. She didn't want childish games. The arrow shattered Marta's arrows in flight. It seemed that she was rightfully included in the top 5 of the third year of training. The people were amazed. The stands rejoiced. The third course shot down too small a target. It was decided to fire 2 arrows. She decided to gradually start increasing the level of damage inflicted. But she couldn't hit her very hard. Her opponent said that she was actually ordinary. Ross's words gave hope, but they were not justified. Martha was angry. It was time for her to confirm the words of the Knight Ross. Cherry decided to resort to chi. The girl underestimated her. It was time to put her in her place. Cherry's arrow, having pierced the enemy's arrow, flew towards Martha, who was surprised by the stranger's abilities. At the last moment, the girl ran away. The blow that hit the wall seemed to shake the stands. People were shocked. The third-year student's strength was incredible. Marta understood that she could have been seriously injured. Dan simply screamed in surprise. A blow of such force could have killed him. It was even difficult to catch the trajectory of the blow. Ray didn't know if Martha had a chance. He thought the girl should give up because she could get badly hurt. But Monk understood that Marta would not give up. She would go to the end. He believed in her. She decided to concentrate. There was no point in being distracted. She collected several arrows, launching them at her opponent. She tried to shoot arrows and move to avoid being caught. She attacked and left. It was impossible to get into her field of vision. It was necessary to somehow find a gap in her defense. However, Cherry wasn't in the top 5 for nothing. It seemed to have predicted the trajectory of her movements. Marta found a blind spot, hoped that she would hit it. She had to hit it. But Cherry immediately turned around, shooting back an arrow that was filled with chi, and Martha seemed to be cornered.